Chapter 659. Under the golden light, the Atlantis ruins slowly rose up from the bottom of the ocean. The only thing that connected Atlantis City and the undersea continent was a 30-meter thick pillar that supported the heavens. It looked a little unbelievable. The entire pillar was also covered in a golden light, and a mysterious power was added to it as it held up Atlantis City. If Ouyang Shuo saw this, he would probably think about the legendary Jingu Bang. When the Atlantis ruins completely rose up from the ocean, it caused a huge tsunami. The entire Mediterranean Ocean region could feel this strong ripple. Along the Mediterranean Ocean, numerous merchant ships and fishing boats were unable to return to their ports in time and struggled bitterly in the huge waves. The nearby Gibraltar Ocean region had even more huge waves, each taller than the last. The tallest one was actually dozens of meters high. With the help of the wishes of the Mazu Temple and the Silver Prayer House, 2 Mengchong warships capsized. As for the Sima boats, they were kept into the turreted ships during the first wave. On Dragon Head, Zheng He looked out at the huge waves and gave out a bitter smile. He knew what the Lord had gone to do. He knew that the Lord was the one who caused this huge wave. It's really the Dragon King Temple. Zheng He exclaimed as he organized a search and rescue operation. Even the voyage squadron with the protection of the Mazu Temple was in trouble, much less the Spanish squadron. Based on incomplete calculations, there were at least 50 Spanish warships that capsized in the ocean. Some of the smaller warships were even split in half by the huge waves. Atlantis used such a domineering method to announce their strong return. Under the golden light, the ruins did not simply rise up from the bottom of the ocean. Instead, under the help of a mysterious power, it started to rearrange itself and form a complete Atlantis-style island. The new Atlantis Island was still a standard 3-story concentric circle design. At the center of the circle was the Ocean God Temple, which shone with a blue light. It was the only building in the area. The Ocean God was the core element of Atlantis, and its position was even higher than the royal family. Even the technology of Atlantis, like the flying devices and warships, were modeled after the giant beasts of the ocean. The Inner Circle Islands were the lucky survivors, and it was also the core of Atlantis. The palace, temple, research center, arts center, elder house, altar, and other core structures were all built in the Inner Circle. According to the rules, only Atlanteans who wore magnetic oolite stones of blue and above were qualified to step into the Inner Circle. For others, the Inner Circle was a forbidden zone. The Atlanteans who were able to hold on until now were undoubtedly lucky. The island in the middle circle was formed by the ruins of the cities deep in the sea. It was also the backbone of the Atlantis civilization. Technological factories such as aircraft, ordinary temples, residences, parks, and other buildings were all built in the center circle. The unique technological products of the Atlantis civilization were basically all set up factories in the central circle. It could be said that the islands in the middle circle were the super factories of the Atlantis civilization. Although the ruins of the city were dilapidated, its construction materials were precious treasures. Every piece of stone was meticulously carved by the Atlanteans and could be repaired again. It was foreseeable that the restoration of the buildings in the center circle would be the Atlanteans' mission for a very long time in the future. The problem was that the 10,000 years of silence had caused the population of Atlantis to plummet and the talents to wither. If he wanted to repair the center circle by himself, it would be an extremely long process. To the players, this was an opportunity. Ouyang Shuo remembered that in his last life, Atlantis would crazily release a large number of quests to attract players to the center circle to help them repair the buildings. With the help of a large number of players, the restoration was completed in less than half a year, which could be considered a small miracle. The outer circle of islands was a new circle of islands that took up the largest area. It was a gift from the golden magnetic oolite to the Atlanteans, waiting for them to develop it. 10,000 years ago, the Atlantis civilization was a huge empire. They did not only have one such concentric circle islands, but dozens of them. At their peak, there were even over 100 of them. Now, there was only one left. Even though they had risen up, The glory of Atlantis was not there. What appeared in the Mediterranean was just the afterglow of the empire. Around the periphery of the island, there were 24 towering giants that were over 100 meters tall. The giants spread out their arms and formed a circle, guarding the island of Atlantis. The giants were unique to the Atlantis civilization, and they were known as the magnetic Oolite magic-powered mechanical puppets. They could also be split into battle puppets and engineering puppets. On the surface and inside of the puppets were carvings, and they had complete mechanical circuits. They relied on magnetic oolite to move. The giants guarding the outer ring of the island were all combat golems. They were also the core strength of Atlantis. Unless it was a life or death situation, the Atlanteans would not use them. Every single one of these combat puppets possessed extraordinary battle prowess, capable of splitting mountains and splitting seas, possessing incomparable strength. If one had to compare, the octopus monster boss that Ouyang Shua had faced before was nothing in front of these puppets. Even if they were bombarded by cannons, they would not move at all. The only weakness of the battle puppets was that they used up a lot of energy. A blue magnetic oolite could only sustain them for an hour. After that, they would go into hibernation. When a magnetic oolite was fully charged, they could enter battle once more. Hence, the battle puppets were a trump card. In the modern era, they were strategic nuclear weapons. The battle puppets were strong, but the engineering puppets were not simple either. Each one was 4 to 5 meters tall, and there were even some that were 10 meters tall. Although in front of the battle puppets, the engineering puppets were like little brothers compared to the construction workers, they were giants. When building the city walls, if he had the help of a dozen construction puppets, it would be a piece of cake for him to move large chunks of rock that had troubled countless craftsmen. It would be as easy as carrying a toy. Apart from building the city walls, temples, monuments, and the like, the construction puppets could also be used to load and unload goods at the docks, transport ores in the mines, and move large stones in the quarry. Even to say that the construction puppets had their own drill bits, which could be used to dig tunnels and other difficult jobs. In Atlantis, the construction puppets were widely used in various construction fields. Half of the credit for the construction of Atlantis was due to the construction puppets. Most importantly, the construction puppets had a really high endurance. The construction puppets would charge for a day, and on the third day, they could continue to work. Be it the battle puppets or the construction puppets, they were all extraordinary existences. The construction technology of the puppets was also the pinnacle of Atlantis technology, totally exceeding the technology trees of the various countries in the game. Between the 3 concentric circles of islands, there were 3 ring-shaped inland rivers of the same width. The water in the rivers was fresh water, and they were rich in fish. This was the foundation of Atlantis in the Mediterranean Ocean. In the rivers, there were many ships that looked like giant underwater beasts, shuttling back and forth. At first glance, there were whales, sharks, and large fish, and they were really eye-catching. These ships were called mimicry ships, and there were normal fishing and merchant ships, as well as warships. The warships were driven by magnetic oolite, and they were the backbone of the defense of Atlantis. One could say that Atlantis technology basically revolved around magnetic oolite. Along with the unique carving techniques of the Atlantis civilization, they formed a unique technological civilization. Even if other countries had the relevant technology, without magnetic oolite, it was useless. Apart from the water between the concentric circles, there were also bridges between the islands. There was a bridge from east to west and north to south, crossing the 3 islands and forming a cross. At the end of the bridges were the 4 ports of Atlantis. For the Atlantis civilization to be able to form 4 ports in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, it was really amazing. Looking down from above, the entire Atlantis was really majestic and had a strong sense of technology. At this very moment, a regional notification sounded out throughout the Mediterranean countries. Mediterranean region notification. Congratulations to China region, Lord Chiu Ewui, for completing the S-grade large-scale storyline quest, The Lost Atlantis. The Atlantis civilization has reappeared in the world, and they have established themselves in the Mediterranean region. The Atlantis civilization and related exploration quests are officially open to players. As for the specific situation, players can explore on their own. The moment the notification went out, the Mediterranean Ocean suddenly became silent. There was also a reasonable explanation for the sudden tsunami that affected the entire Mediterranean Sea. What? Atlantis? To the Mediterranean countries, Atlantis was definitely not a foreign term. However, they definitely did not expect that the legendary civilization would actually appear in the Mediterranean. Their first reaction was, where is Atlantis? In the vast ocean, it was not easy to find an island. Some smart players thought about Chiua Wui and the Gibraltar port conflict, and they immediately locked their eyes on the Gibraltar Straits. All the squadrons in the Mediterranean were shocked and rushed toward the Gibraltar Straits. The most awkward one was the Spanish squadron. They were still shedding blood for the country war and had even said that they would teach the Shanghai City Squadron a lesson. Now, all of a sudden, something like this happened. Thinking back to the dozens of warships that had capsized in the tsunami, they felt even worse. What a jerk! Juan's thoughts probably represented the thoughts of most of the Spanish people. The international forums were in an uproar. After all, only a small number of players could personally head out to search for Atlantis. As for those who could not go, they could only gossip about Atlantis on the forums. All of a sudden, all the rumors about Atlantis in real life were dug out by players. The more they understood, the more they were tempted. Some of the more impatient adventure game mode, players chose to rent boats and head toward the Gibraltar Straits. Chapter 660. On the forum, the arrogant Spaniards were completely silenced. Lord Juan, who was greedy for fame and fortune, became a joke. Disappointing, the domestic players sighed. He didn't know how this baffling kingdom war was going to end. Atlantis Island, Inner Circle Palace. Ouyang Shua had already left the cave and returned to the surface of the palace with Kalia. As for the Divine Guards, they stayed on the island in the middle circle. Not long after the regional announcement ended, Ouyang Shua heard a system notification. System notification. Congratulations to player, don't say you have clothes. You have completed the first side mission of the S-level large-scale storyline mission, The Disappearance of Atlantis. Reward: 1 top Atlantis technology, 1 purple crystal, 50,000 achievement points, 150,000 reputation points, and other rewards. The achievement points and reputation points were directly awarded. In this way, Ouyang Shua's 2 major attributes were close to the critical point of advancement. It could be said to be a great harvest. Including the achievement points obtained from the battle with the Spanish fleet, Ouyang Shua's total achievement points had reached 945,000 points. He still needed 55,000 points to be promoted to Duke. Even his reputation points had reached 820,000 points. He still needed 180,000 points to be promoted to the next level, which was also the highest level of reputation achievement, famous across the world. As soon as the system notification ended, Korea, who was at the side, spoke. You're not without clothes. You're Atlantis benefactor. As he spoke, he took off the purple crystal hanging around his neck and handed it to Ouyang Shua. This is for you. Ouyang Shua was a little hesitant. Although there was a purple crystal in the mission reward, he never thought it would be the one hanging around Kalia's neck. He knew that whether it was Kalia personally or the Atlantis race, this purple crystal must have an extraordinary significance. It was not comparable to an ordinary purple magnetite. Please accept it. This is a token of our appreciation, Kalia insisted. Ouyang Shua sighed in his heart and reached out to take it. Earth on Lo had a high degree of freedom. Even the mission rewards were not the same. The NPCs in the storyline missions would flexibly give out rewards according to the mission process. Kalia's action was like this. She had a good impression of Ouyang Shua, so she gave the purple crystal that she personally wore to Ouyang Shua as a mission reward. Although they had not known each other for long, Ouyang Shua had left a deep impression on Kalia. To Ouyang Shua, Kalia was mysterious. But to Kalia, Ouyang Shua was even more mysterious. This fated person who had suddenly appeared had an extraordinary status, a calm demeanor, and a shocking amount of wealth. All of this was nothing to the queen, Carly. What truly shocked Kalia was Ouyang Shua's unyielding. While under the pressure of the golden magnetic Oregon, Kalia knew very well that Ouyang Shua was the first person in history who didn't kneel down under the pressure of the golden magnetic Oregon. Just this alone was enough to be recorded in the history of the Atlanteans. Ouyang Shua's unyielding gaze and unswerving expression had completely moved Kalia's heart. As the first queen of the Atlanteans, Korea admired this unyielding spirit the most. Kalia hoped to gain Ouyang Shua's personal friendship, and the two of them could have other interactions. Ouyang Shua took the purple crystal and looked at its properties. Name: magnetic or exclusive to the royal family. Level: purple. Origin: Atlantean civilization. Basic function: energy stone, can provide energy for specific items, can be recharged repeatedly. Advanced function: derivation: the purple magnetic ore can derive 1 blue magnetic ore, 2 green magnetic ore, and 4 white magnetic ore every month. Note: only the purple magnetic ore and the golden magnetic ore have the derivation function. Magnetic ores below the purple level cannot be derived. Advanced function: cultivation assistance. The purple magnetic ore has a mysterious energy. Long-term where can calm the mind, refine the purity of true yuan, speed up the progress of cultivation, and increase the concentration of true yuan. Exclusive function: fortune source. The purple magnetic ore, exclusive to the royal family, is specially blessed by the golden magnetic Oregon. When wearing it, the basic fortune source plus 4 points, and a certain probability of a fortuitous encounter. Evaluation: the golden magnetic ore is an extraterrestrial object that gave birth to the brilliant Atlantean civilization. If used reasonably, it will have endless wonderful uses. It is indeed a rare treasure. After looking at the properties, Ouyang Shua was speechless. The strength of the purple magnetic ore completely exceeded Ouyang Shua's strength. The basic attribute, energy stone, seemed inconspicuous, but it was a powerful weapon to drive magic puppets, mimic warships, and mimic aircraft. The advanced function, derivation, was heaven-defying. Could it be that this is the legendary stone that gives birth to stone? Ouyang Shua thought to himself. In a year's time, 1 purple magnetic ore could give birth to 12 blue magnetic ores, 24 green magnetic ores, and 48 white magnetic ores. According to Kalia, the white magnetic ores did not have many uses. They were basically one-time consumables. They were mainly used by the Atlanteans for their daily cultivation, similar to the spirit stones in China. Of course, the white magnetic ore was not as powerful as the legendary spirit stones. 1 white magnetic ore was estimated to be equivalent to the result of an Atlantean's cultivation for an hour. The green magnetic ore was the mainstream magnetic Oregon. It was widely used in all kinds of high-tech products in Atlantis. Other than the combat magic puppets, the green magnetic ore could be driven by anything. The blue magnetic ore was already a rare item. Only the upper echelons could have it. As for the purple magnetic ore, other than the members of the royal family, only the elders of the Elder Council had the right to wear it. The purple magnetic ore could only be derived from the golden magnetic Oregon. It could only be produced once every 10 years. If that's the case, in 10,000 years, didn't you guys accumulate countless magnetic ore? Ouyang Shua asked Kalia. When Kalia heard this, his expression became gloomy. There is no sunlight in the land of survival. The purple magnetic ore we have can't be charged at all, so it can't be derived at all. It can even be said that 99% of the magnetic ore of various grades that we accumulated before have automatically exploded and become useless because we can't be charged for a long time. The golden magnetic ore has to support the energy barrier, so it can't be derived from the purple magnetic Oregon. Ouyang Shua was silent. No wonder Kalia was so desperate before. If no players appeared and completed the plot mission, the foundation of the Atlantean civilization would have been completely destroyed. Fortunately, we managed to survive, didn't we? Kalia was optimistic. That's why, Wui, you're our great benefactor. No matter how we repay you, it's never too much. Ouyang Shua was speechless. In addition to derivation, the high-level function of the purple magnetic or cultivation assistance was also very powerful. It could not only speed up the progress of cultivation, but it could also increase the concentration of true vitality. It was basically equivalent to an extremely rare cultivation treasure. It could be said that there was both an increase in quantity and a sharp change in quality. This kind of treasure was something that Ouyang Shua had been searching for. He did not expect that it would lead to the purple magnetic Oregon. The last exclusive function, Fortune Source, was a pleasant surprise. Ouyang Shua felt more and more that he was getting closer and closer to getting rid of his unlucky fate. Without saying anything, Ouyang Shua directly hung the purple magnetic ore around his neck. When Kalia saw it, he smiled. "Please follow me." "Where to?" Ouyang Shua asked. "In order to repay your kindness, we have decided to teach you a top technology of the Atlantean race. Apart from that, we will also give you some small gifts," Kalia explained. When Ouyang Shua heard this, he could not help but feel his heart beat faster. Wasn't this the reason they spent 2 million gold coins? The two of them walked all the way and finally arrived at a loft in the Atlantis Research Center. The loft displayed all kinds of scientific and technological achievements of the Atlantis civilization. In addition to the magic puppets, warships, and flying machines, the Atlantis civilization also designed a complete lighting system, transportation system, and municipal system. Everything was the product of the combination of the magnetic ore and the carvings. To Ouyang Shua, the magnetic ore was limited. Without the golden magnetic ore as an energy source, building a lighting system was just wishful thinking. The only thing Ouyang Shua could do was to choose between the magic puppets, warships, and flying machines. Ouyang Shua first eliminated the mimicry warships. Ouyang Shua looked at the Atlantean mimicry warships. Other than the energy source, there was nothing special about the warship's structural design and weapon system. If the Shanghai City Navy wanted to dominate the sea, they would have to rely on the future steel warships and the more powerful cannon system. Only then would they be invincible. A small number of mimicry warships were simply insignificant. Between the magic puppets and the flying machines, Ouyang Shua finally chose the flying machines. Of course, Ouyang Shua coveted the combat and engineering magic puppets. Ouyang Shua eliminated the magic puppets because they were not irreplaceable in Shanghai City. No matter how powerful the combat puppets were, they could not be stronger than thousands of soldiers, ships, and cannons. Although using the combat puppets on the battlefield would be shocking, it was not enough to change the course of a large-scale war. Their cumbersome bodies and weak endurance made it easy for the enemy to target them. No matter how powerful the engineering magic puppets were, they could still be built with manpower and craftsmen. Shanghai City was a big city, and a few engineering magic puppets were not enough to change the layout of the buildings. They could only be icing on the cake. What was irreplaceable was the flying machines. In ancient times, it was wishful thinking to have an air force, even if it was only for reconnaissance purposes. 5 years ago, in his previous life, a lord tried to train large raptors to form an aerial reconnaissance unit, and it was indeed successful. However, suitable raptors were hard to find, and there were not many of them. Whether or not they could be successfully formed depended on luck. The Atlantean mimicry flying machines were different. As long as they had the magnetic, or there were no technical obstacles in forming a small aerial reconnaissance unit. Ouyang Shua's purple magnetic or could make all of this possible. Chapter 661. After making his choice, Korea handed Ouyang Shua a thick booklet. Ouyang Shua took a look and saw that it was indeed the Atlantis Mimic Aircraft Manufacturing Technical Manual. After using it, he would automatically master the relevant manufacturing techniques of the aircraft. The minimum requirement for the magnetite for the aircraft was green grade. A green magnetite could support the aircraft for 6 hours, and a blue magnetite could support the aircraft for 12 hours. Since it was called an aircraft, its speed was incomparable to that of a real plane. According to the manual, the maximum speed of an aircraft was 200 kilometers per hour. A single green magnetite could only support a single aircraft flying across a county. If they really wanted to conduct long-distance aerial reconnaissance, they would have to build fixed airports in each county for the aircraft to take off and land and supply. In addition to forming an aerial reconnaissance team, the existence of the Atlantis Mimic Aircraft Manufacturing Technical Manual would also help improve the industrial strength of Shanghai City. Although it was the simplest aircraft that relied on magnetite and carvings to drive, its steel-making level, fine processing of mechanical parts, and other technologies were all worthy of the No. 7 Research Institute's research. In modern society, aircraft manufacturing technology basically represented the industrial level of a country or region. The design and manufacturing of aircraft were related to materials, electronics, machinery, vehicles, energy, construction, and almost all other industrial sectors. It could drive the technological upgrading of a series of related industries. With the support of the manual, it would definitely help Shanghai City break through the bottleneck of the technology tree. Understanding the manual would be a comprehensive upgrade for Shanghai City's industry that was just starting out. Seeing that Ouyang Shuo had finished reading, Korea handed over another booklet. This is for you too. Atlantis Navigation Technical Manual. After use, you will automatically master the relevant navigation technology accumulated by the Atlantis civilization. 10,000 years ago, the Atlantis Empire, which had not yet sunk, was itself a powerful maritime country. The navigation technology that the Atlanteans mastered was comparable to that of Europe in the 18th century. Therefore, the Navigation Technical Manual would be of great help to Shanghai City's maritime industry. In the future, Shanghai City would not be at a disadvantage in terms of navigation technology when it came to disputes with the Western maritime powers. Another additional reward. Korea was really generous to Ouyang Shuo. After leaving the research center, it was time for Ouyang Shuo to leave Atlantis. Accompanied by Korea, Ouyang Shuo crossed the bridge and came to the Middle Circle Island to meet the Divine Guards. Looking from afar, there was a mountain of underwater breathing apparatus at the feet of the Divine Guards. In addition, there were a large number of miscellaneous items. Needless to say, these things were collected by the Divine Guards from the ruins under Ouyang Shuo's instructions. There was a saying that went like master, like servant. Although using it to describe the Divine Martial Guard was somewhat inappropriate, in terms of sweeping, the Divine Martial Guard and Ouyang Shuo were of the same origin. If it was any other time, Ouyang Shuo would definitely praise the Divine Guards. Now, Ouyang Shuo glanced at Carly, who was at the side, and his face was filled with embarrassment. When Atlantis emerged from the sea, the items collected by the Divine Guards were no longer ownerless items. Strictly, it was not Yang Shuo, but was it. How could Ouyang Shuo face the passionate Kalia with such behavior? Seeing this, Korea glanced at Ouyang Shuo with a faint smile. Mion smiled. Big Brother Wooey, I was thinking of giving you some Atlantean products, but I didn't expect that you would be so lucky. It's all good now. I don't have to look for it. In a short period of time, Korea changed the way he addressed Ouyang Shuo. The greed of Ouyang Shuo's subordinates made Kalia have a deeper understanding of Ouyang Shuo, and his mood suddenly became happy. It was as if this mysterious man had suddenly descended to the mortal world and become alive. How could Korea then not be excited about such an interesting discovery? Ouyang Shuo smiled with ridicule, yet his skin was extremely thick, and he followed the excuse Kalia gave him to naturally put all those things into his storage pouch. Not to mention anything else, this batch of underwater breathing apparatus was a rare treasure. Of course, Ouyang Shuo wouldn't use the underwater breathing apparatus to search for underwater treasures. However, with underwater breathing apparatus as the core equipment, it was completely feasible to form a special frogman team for the Navy. In reality, frogmen were the Navy's special forces. They were responsible for underwater reconnaissance, demolition, and special combat missions. They were called frogmen because they were equipped with tools that looked like frog feet. The frogman team was very secretive and dangerous. It included reconnaissance in the enemy's rear area, destroying mobile launch devices, air defense facilities, water conservancy projects, and command posts. The frogman equipment included masks, fins, rubber jackets, oxygen tanks, and so on. In comparison, the underwater breathing apparatus produced by Atlantis was like a bug. No matter how advanced modern technology was, it was impossible to produce such light and powerful frogman equipment. As such, the Shanghai City Navy had gained another trump card: Atlantis Outer Circle Island, North Port. Finally, it was time to leave. In order to make it easier for the Divine Guards to meet up with the ocean fleet, Korea gave them 2 Shark-class Mimic warships. In addition, there was also a Dolphin-class Mimic aircraft. As expected of the Queen of Atlantis, she was generous. Ouyang Shua let the Divine Guards ride the Mimic warship. He personally piloted the Mimic aircraft and rushed to the assembly point of the ocean fleet under Little Qing's guidance. Speaking of which, it was time to settle the score with Spain. On the morning of July 27th, Gibraltar Sea, when Ouyang Shua piloted the Mimic aircraft and slowly landed on the top deck of Dragon Head, one could imagine how shocked Zheng He and the other Navy officers were. If not for Little Qing's guidance, Zheng He would probably have ordered a fire. When Ouyang Shua walked out of the cockpit, the officers on the deck cheered enthusiastically. If not for the military discipline, they would have long been unable to resist and would have gone to see this strange machine. The officers and soldiers never dreamed that there would be a cumbersome monster that could fly like a bird in the world. I'm not dreaming, am I? A dumbfounded soldier pinched his thigh. How do you guys think this iron lump flew into the sky? The Marquis is so brave. He can even control such a monster. The appearance of the Mimic aircraft completely subverted the Navy officers' understanding of this world. Even the Navy Commander-in-Chief Zheng He's eyes flashed with shock and astonishment. Ouyang Shua smiled faintly. He didn't pay attention to the excited soldiers and directly called Zheng He to the war room. As soon as he sat down, he asked Zheng He to report the military situation. Tell me, what's the situation now? Zheng He didn't dare to delay and repeated the situation in detail. So, we are no longer able to deal with the Spanish fleet? Ouyang Shua frowned. Zheng He looked ashamed. I'm ashamed. I haven't thought of a way to defeat the enemy yet. Ouyang Shua waved his hand. He knew that the ocean-going fleet didn't have enough manpower after all. He couldn't blame Zheng He for this. However, Ouyang Shua wasn't satisfied if he didn't teach the Spanish fleet a good lesson. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little gloomy, Zheng He tactfully changed the topic. He cupped his fists and said, "The Marquis' trip has shocked everyone and stirred up the entire Mediterranean Sea. I'm impressed." Ouyang Shua nodded and briefly explained the Atlantis trip. Zheng He was amazed when he heard it. The mysterious Atlantis civilization was more shocking than he had imagined. May I be so bold as to ask, how many underwater breathing devices did the Marquis collect? Zheng He asked. Ouyang Shua didn't count. He sank his consciousness into the storage bag and roughly scanned. I'm afraid there are more than 10,000. He paused and said, Why? Do you have a new strategy? Zheng He had always been a cautious person. He wouldn't even ask about things he wasn't sure of. I'm thinking if we can use the underwater breathing devices to arrange for a large number of sailors to infiltrate the enemy fleet and sink their warships. By then, won't they be at our mercy? Zheng He revealed his plan. Ouyang Shua's eyes lit up. It's possible, but the specific plan needs to be carefully discussed. This kind of surprise attack can't be done twice. Once the enemy is on guard, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult to be effective. Understood. The two of them discussed for more than 2 hours in the war room. During this time, Ouyang Shua also called the Navy staff and other generals to discuss with him to ensure that there were no mistakes in the plan. That afternoon, the battle plan was officially implemented. The ocean-going fleet first sent out a large number of Scarlet Horse boats to investigate the specific location of the Spanish fleet. At the crucial moment, Ouyang Shua even personally piloted the Mimic aircraft to investigate the sea. Even Little Qing was forcibly recruited by Ouyang Shua. After completely figuring out the location of the Spanish fleet, it was time for the Frogman Brigade, equipped with underwater breathing devices, to appear. They would take the Scarlet Horse boats and first arrive in the waters near the Spanish fleet. Then, They would dive to the bottom of the sea and secretly sneak under the enemy fleet. When night fell, they would carry out the operation of sinking the ships. The frogman brigade that Ouyang Shua had planned hurriedly appeared on the stage of history. At this time, the frogman brigade was just a group of sailors carrying simple tools. It was worlds apart from Ouyang Shua's imagination. The real frogman brigade could not only sink the ships, but they could also use it to board the enemy's ships and carry out decapitation operations. The more powerful ones could even sneak into the enemy's rear ports and carry out large-scale destruction operations. For the current Spanish fleet, this kind of frogman brigade was enough to make them suffer. No one would have thought that there would be people who could travel freely under the sea at this stage. Such a group of Spectre warriors would definitely launch a fatal blow to the Spanish fleet. At sunset, the ocean-going fleet once again split into four and advanced toward the four largest Spanish fleet groups. They were ready to harvest the fruits of victory and send the Spanish invincible fleet to hell. Chapter 662. The Strait of Gibraltar was unusually quiet under the cover of night. Only the waves on the surface of the sea made a crashing sound. Whales and sharks leaped out of the sea from time to time, spitting out huge splashes. On the sea, Spanish galleons rose and fell with the waves. It was a spectacular sight. Spanish galleons were one of the most legendary galleons in history. As the epitome of Spain's maritime hegemony in the 16th and 17th centuries, they were often associated with treasures, pirates, conquerors, and invincible fleets. The typical characteristics of a galleon were a high chord, a high stern, a low front deck, a flat stern, and a protruding bow, like the ram of a paddle boat, where there was an independent gun position. The hull was clearly equilateral trapezoid, and this slope extended all the way to the stern. The lines of the Spanish galleon were beautiful, and the stern was even more exquisite. The length-to-width ratio of the entire warship was 4:1, which gave it an advantage in speed compared to the carrack. The tonnage of the galleon reached 300 tons, which allowed it to provide a stable firing platform for cannons. At the same time, the towering ship also provided a fortress-like cover for the soldiers on board, giving it an advantage in close combat. Below the battery was the cargo hold, and above the ship were the passengers and soldiers. At this stage, only the large fortress ships made by Shanghai City could compare to it. After the tsunami, there was a disagreement within Spain as to whether or not to continue to encircle the Shanghai City fleet. Some people thought that since the port of Gibraltar had been recovered, they might as well give up. The most important thing at the moment was to find Atlantis and not let other countries beat them to it. Some people also thought that whether or not they could defeat the Shanghai City fleet had risen to a major event that concerned the reputation of the entire Spain. If the fleet was allowed to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, it would pose a huge impact and challenge to the dominance of the Spanish invincible fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. The lost glory can only be baptized by blood. So said the pro-war faction. The hegemony of the sea must be defended to the death. We can't give even a single step. They clamored. It had to be said that such clamoring was very Spanish. In the entire European continent, perhaps there was no nation more fond of splendor, extravagance, and face than the Spanish. It was as if the entire Spanish nation's character was painted with strong red and black. It could be said that most of the extravagant and exaggerated things in European aristocratic society were added by the Spanish, including the famous hard collar, rapier, short pants, fencing jacket, lace, and so on. All of this had something to do with the romantic nights of Spain. Spanish literature world's greatest writer Cervantes, in his novel Don Quixote, through the protagonist Don Quixote to this so-called knight, carried out a thorough irony. The magnificent chivalry of Spain had even continued into modern times. The famous Spanish bullfight was the best embodiment of such chivalry. In Spain and the entire Spanish-speaking world, bullfighters were regarded as brave and fearless men. They were respected and worshipped by the people, and their social status was extremely high. Gorgeous clothes, hot-blooded assassination, it was simply a copy of medieval knights. It was precisely because of this that the Spanish, who valued their reputation, could not tolerate the players from other countries in the Mediterranean Sea humiliating them on the forum. The pro-war faction completely gained the upper hand without much of an intense debate. The Spanish decided to go against the wind and defeat Shanghai City's ocean fleet in one fell swoop. This time, the Spanish coalition fleet covered almost all the main naval fleets of the Spanish coastal lords. Just the main warships alone, the Spanish galleons, numbered more than 600. In addition, there were a large number of Clark galleons as escorts. There were even a variety of miscellaneous sailboats sailed by adventure players alone, dotted in the coalition fleet. This time, Spain could be said to have turned out in full force. The coalition fleet was divided into 5 battle groups, forming a huge arc on the sea, echoing each other and slowly approaching the ocean fleet under the command of the commander-in-chief of the fleet. If Ouyang Shaw did not come back in time, the ocean fleet might really suffer. And everything, on this seemingly ordinary night, was completely reversed. In the darkness of the night, with the sound of the waves hitting the warships, more than 4,000 frogmen, wearing underwater breathing devices, divided into 4 groups, came to the bottom of the Spanish warships and began to cut the ships. Because they were afraid that the sound of cutting the ships would alarm the Spanish on the ships, the frogmen moved very slowly and had to accurately follow the rhythm of the waves, breaking one by one. At this time, the Spanish warships had already adopted advanced watertight compartment technology. Therefore, the frogmen needed to cut at least 2 cabins at the bottom of the ships to ensure that the warships would sink. As a result, their workload was greatly increased. It was not that Ouyang Shaw did not think of simply sending 10,000 frogmen, but it was difficult to achieve. First, the Scarlet Horse boats' transport capacity was limited, and frequently arriving at the enemy fleet would be easily detected by the Spanish fleet. Second, while it was easier to get things done with more people, it also greatly increased the chances of exposure and mistakes. Once the Spanish fleet noticed their actions, the effect would be greatly reduced. Therefore, after overall consideration, Ouyang Shaw and Zheng, he finally chose 4,000 capable soldiers. When the sun rose from the sea again, the thrilling night was finally over. The 4,000 frogmen successfully completed their mission and quietly left the bottom of the sea. And just 20 miles away from the Spanish fleet, the ocean fleet of Shanghai City slowly approached, like the emissaries of the god of death. The morning sun was especially red. The red was bewitching, so red that it made people panic. The first afterglow of the morning sun across the sky dyed the sea blood red. After a night, the bottom of the Spanish warships was flooded with water and began to slowly sink. When the sailors entered the cabins for routine inspection, they were dumbfounded by the water that filled the cabins. Oh God, the sailors were at a loss. Almost at the same time, the major fleets sounded the alarm. On the flagship of the first battle group of the Spanish coalition fleet in the middle, an old general, who was bald and had a white curly beard and was wearing Spanish plate armor, walked out of the cabin. The old general was dressed in a typical Spanish aristocratic style, with a hard collar, a thin sword, and short pants. He was not missing any of the standard Spanish aristocratic attire. Whether it was the few strands of hair on the top of his head or his thick beard, they were all carefully groomed and meticulously groomed. Obviously, this was a typical Spanish aristocrat. The old general's name was Álvaro de Bazan, the first Marquis of Santa Cruz. He was called the Father of Soldiers by the Spanish soldiers, and he was the most capable naval general in Spain. When mentioning the Marquis of Santa Cruz, one had to mention the most glorious period in Spanish history, and the most powerful king in Spanish history, Philip II. Philip II was the son of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. After Charles V announced his abdication, he inherited the Habsburg Empire, except for Austria and Germany, where the family originated. Charles V's younger brother, the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I, inherited the title of Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the highest position in Germany in name, but not in reality. As for Spain and the Netherlands, the source of the Habsburg dynasty's military and economic power. They belonged to Philip II. This also laid a solid foundation for the rise of Philip II. It was during the reign of Philip II that Spain ushered in the most powerful era in its history. During this period, Spain even forcibly annexed its neighbor, Portugal. Spain's status as a maritime power was established during this period. Under the rule of Philip II, Spain's national strength reached its peak. Historians called this period the Habsburg dynasty, which dominated the whole of Europe. Philip II had several naval generals under his command, including the Spanish god of war, Duke Fernando of Alva, known as the Bloody Butcher, Philip II's half-brother Don Juan, Alvaro, Marquis of Santa Cruz, and Alexander Farnese, Duke of Parma. The white-bearded old general, Alvaro, who appeared on the deck, was the Marquis of Santa Cruz under Philip II in history. It was he who led his troops to capture Portugal. In 1583, in the Battle of San Miguel, Alvaro led his troops to defeat the French fleet commanded by Elma de Chateau and executed all the prisoners of war. After the war, Alvaro became the commander-in-chief of the Spanish fleet. In 1585, the Marquis of Santa Cruz suggested sending a naval expedition to invade England. Unfortunately, before the expedition was ready, the Marquis of Santa Cruz died on February 9, 1588. The death of the Marquis of Santa Cruz marked the decline of the Spanish invincible fleet. The Marquis of Santa Cruz was the only historical general to appear in the wilderness of Spain. The other naval generals were either not born yet, or they followed Philip II and lived in the Palace of Madrid, the capital of Spain, and were not subdued by the players. Therefore, Alvaro was appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Spanish combined fleet without any dispute. What happened? The old general's eyes were sharp, and he was not angry. "Commander, our warship is leaking and is slowly sinking." The first officer looked flustered. "Why is it leaking? Can it be plugged? How many warships are leaking? What about the other formations?" Alvaro's heart suddenly jumped, and he asked a series of questions. Looking at the red sun in the distant sky, Alvaro frowned, and his heart became more and more uneasy. Reporting to Commander, after investigation, the leak is because the bottom of the cabin was cut open. There is too much water, and the hole is too big. It is difficult to plug it again. And it is not just one warship that is leaking, almost every warship is leaking. The situation of the other formations has not been reported to the headquarters. The first officer's face was pale. Chapter 663. Even with Alvaro's composure, he could not help but shudder when he heard the first mate's report. He could not imagine how the enemy had destroyed all the warships in a single night without them noticing. There's no need to wait. Pass down the order. Abandon the warships and leave this place on the small boats. As expected of a veteran, Alvaro acted decisively and without any hesitation. "Yes, sir." The first mate performed a military salute before turning around and leaving. Alvaro stood tall and straight on the bow of the warship, his furrowed brows still furrowed. The enemy definitely has a backup plan after setting up such a vicious scheme. He had only ordered the escape on the small boats because he was hoping for a fluke. Alvaro, who had spent his entire life on the battlefield, knew full well that this was often the case on the battlefield. The more you hope for a fluke, the more likely it would happen. Considering the worst-case scenario had long since become the instinct of a general on the battlefield. The problem was there was no other path of retreat in the vast sea. Alvaro's deep gaze seemed to be able to see the bloody scene of the battlefield. 10 minutes later, thousands of spare small boats were lowered from the warship, and the sailors hurriedly transported the necessities of survival onto the small boats. The NPC army was bound by military discipline, so most of them could still maintain their calm. Under the command of their respective commanding officers, teams of players boarded the small boats in an orderly manner. However, the adventurer players were different. With so many people, it was inevitable that there would be crowding and queue jumping. Those with even the slightest bit of navigational knowledge knew that the emergency boats on the warship were not enough to accommodate all the crew members. Not to mention, some of the small boats also had to carry supplies. Thus, no matter how much people squeezed, there would still be some who could not board the small boats. Those who boarded the small boats had a chance of survival, but those who did not would not escape death. In the face of the threat of death, very few people could remain calm. Compared to the NPC army, the adventurer players valued their lives even more. Every reincarnation was equivalent to returning to their original state. The further they went, the more chaotic the situation became. Seeing the small boats being filled one after another, the people still on the deck could no longer remain calm. Shoving, shouting, and even fighting took place on the warships. Aside from the adventurer players, even the sailors on the ships panicked. They no longer had the mood to work, and they all joined in the fight for the small boats. The scene was chaotic. Scram, you lowly commoners. Amidst the clamor, this shout was still very ear-piercing. On a large Spanish ship to the left, a young adventurer player with a cold expression stabbed a middle-aged sailor in front of him with a thin sword, killing him on the spot. Fresh blood flowed all over the deck, and it was exceptionally glaring. The young man pulled out his Spanish rapier and carelessly wiped it on the sailor's corpse before sheathing it. When the surrounding sailors saw this scene, their eyes flashed with anger and fear. There was a commotion in the crowd. Seeing that the other sailors were looking at him, the cold-looking young man did not think that he had done anything wrong. Instead, he shouted, "What are you looking at? Why do you lowly commoners have to be in front of us?" It had to be said that since the beginning of the game, there were still many players who did not treat NPCs as humans. In their eyes, these NPCs were nothing more than a bunch of data. So what if they were killed? In front of NPC sailors, players felt that they were a cut above others. Therefore, not only did the other players not condemn the cold-looking young man's actions, they even followed his example. If it was light, they would push the sailors in front of them away. If it was heavy, they would directly clash with their weapons. Even if there were players who did not approve of it, they would only silently make a fortune and would not step forward to stop it. How could these sailors be a match for the adventure players? Not to mention them, even the NPC soldiers were no match for the adventurer players in terms of individual combat power. With the connivance of some people, in less than 10 minutes, more than 20 sailors fell into pools of blood, and there were countless heavily injured people. The crowded queue immediately became much more relaxed. Such behavior finally provoked the public's anger. Sailors were also human, and in moments of life and death, they would also explode with extraordinary strength. Brothers, fight them to the death. A man raised a club in his hand. Fight them to the death. If they don't give us a way out, don't even think about leaving alive. At most, we'll die together. If they cannot board the ship, they would die. Since that was the case, why would the sailors be afraid of fighting the players? Thus, the chaotic battle on the deck began. The players and the sailors fought. Although the sailors suffered heavy casualties, it was inevitable that some players would be killed by the sailors in the chaos of battle. This further aroused the hostility in the hearts of the players. Early in the morning, the huge sense of defeat had already made them breathless. Now, even this group of lowly commoners dared to resist. How could the players not be angry? Some of the players who were originally hesitant joined the battle one after another. As a result, the sailors suffered heavy casualties. The small-scale disturbance gradually evolved into a large-scale internal strife. In fact, there was even an embarrassing confrontation between the players who had already boarded the ship and the sailors. The two groups were completely divided. Even the NPC soldiers had a flash of anger in their eyes when they saw their compatriots being slaughtered. If not for the officers coming forward to suppress the situation, it would probably have escalated into an even greater internal conflict. When Alvaro received the news, his beard trembled in anger. At a time like this, these inhumans were still so unscrupulous. They were truly unreasonable and despicable. Tell those bastards to stop, or don't blame me for being rude. Alvaro's expression was gloomy. Understood. The first mate retreated with a troubled expression. The Alliance Fleet Command had almost zero restrictions on the players. The adventure players were all voluntary. Now, the only ones who could restrain these players were the Overlord players and the guild leaders. The Overlord players were also very dissatisfied with this farce. Those sailors were their subjects, not cabbages. How could they not be angry when the guild players harvested their lives just like that? At this moment, a big bearded player suddenly stood up and shouted, "Brats, stop when you've had enough. Don't go too far." Under the effect of his vigorous chi, a loud voice spread throughout the entire sea. Strangely enough, with just this shout, most of the players wisely stopped and quickly left the battlefield. The sailors who were beaten up naturally did not have the courage to continue. They silently retreated to the side and licked their wounds. This was because the big bearded player was none other than the leader of the Madrid mercenary group, the #1 guild in Spain. He was also the #1 expert in Spain, Pepe. Among the Spanish adventurer players, Pepe's prestige was still very high. Most of the players were willing to give Pepe face and stop. Because of Pepe's appearance, the whole matter was settled just like that. As time passed, the cabin was flooded faster and faster. The large sailboats continued to sink, and the speed of their sinking was clearly accelerating. Whirlpools had begun to form on the surface of the sea. "Quick, retreat immediately. Don't care about the supplies." Alvaro jumped onto a small boat and gave an urgent military order. "Retreat. The whirlpools are about to form. Quick, hurry up and row faster." There was no need for Alvaro's reminder. More than 1,500 small boats of the first battle group had already begun to flee in panic. Any sailor with a little common sense knew what a disaster it would be for the small boats once the whirlpools were completely formed. On the vast surface of the sea, such a spectacle appeared. One by one, the large sailboats quickly sank to the bottom of the sea like behemoths that had fallen into a swamp. First the hulls, then the decks, and finally even the masts and exquisite sails disappeared from the sea. Along with them disappeared the glory of the Spanish invincible fleet. Water whirlpools formed one after another on the surface of the sea, strung together like rainwater falling into a pond and creating ripples. However, these ripples were unusually large and dangerous. The densely packed small boats crowded around the periphery of the whirlpools were so terrified and helpless. The players on the small boats were filled with despair. Last night, they were still thinking about defeating the ocean-going fleet and defending the glory of the country. When they woke up, they were already stray dogs. The huge drop, the heavy blow, made the proud Spaniards numb. Even a meritorious general like Alvaro could not inspire the morale of the soldiers. Half an hour later, the battle reports of the other battle groups were reported to the shabby headquarters. Spanish maritime communication used a kind of white seagull to deliver letters. Therefore, even after such a huge change, the communication between the battle groups could still be unimpeded. Reading the report, Alvaro's mood sank to the bottom. Not only the first battle group, but the second, third, and fourth battle groups were also experiencing the same scene. Only the fifth battle group, as the reserve team, was temporarily spared. The fifth battle group was only the reserve team. There were less than 20 Spanish large sailboats. The rest were Carrack large sailboats and miscellaneous sailboats. Before the battle, Alvaro had never thought of joining the fifth battle group. Now, the fifth battle group seemed to be the only hope of the entire invincible fleet. The four battle groups, a total of more than 6,000 small boats, under Alvaro's unified command, gathered majestically toward the fifth battle group, seeking shelter. Such small boats could be completely overturned by a slight tsunami. "I hope we can send these boys back safely." Alvaro sighed. It was not that Alvaro did not know that there might be something fishy about the fifth battle group surviving. It was just that he had no other choice. This kind of stifling battle made him feel very helpless. It was like the enemy had set up a heavy trap. You knew it was a trap, but you had no choice but to fall into it. It was only because in the heavy trap, there was bait left to give people hope. This was the brilliance of the Shanghai City fleet strategy. In Zheng He's words, the fifth battle group is a bait gathering all the Spanish fleet together and then capturing them in one fell swoop. Chapter 664. At around 10 in the morning, the Navy that was in charge of monitoring the 4 Spanish battle groups sent messages one by one, saying that there were no small boats taking the opportunity to leave the main force. Most of the small boats of the enemy were gathering at the 5th battle group, according to the script set by Shanghai City. Zheng, he heaved a long sigh of relief when he received the news. Of course, he could not count on the enemy to gather at the 5th battle group. In order to prevent accidents, he arranged for the Navy to monitor the outside. If there were any smart people who wanted to leave the main force and escape during the chaos, they would be intercepted by the Navy. The entire plan could be said to be watertight. Pass down the order, all units gather and prepare to close the net. Yes, sir. The hummingbirds of the Military Intelligence Department were not safe to communicate on the sea. A gust of wind could blow these little guys away. Communication on the ocean was also completed with the help of domesticated seagulls. Ouyang Shuo returned from Atlantis with a new communication tool. It was the communication conch. The Atlanteans carved magical carvings on the normal conch and permanently embedded a green magnetite in the conch. It could be used as a short-distance communication tool on the sea. Within a range of 1,000 nautical miles, messages could be clearly transmitted. Unfortunately, the communication conch could only be used on the sea. If it was on land, it could only be used within a range of 10 kilometers. The effect was greatly reduced. Otherwise, in the wilderness where communication channels were blocked, the communication conch would definitely be a great weapon. Among the treasures collected by the Divine Martial Guards, there were hundreds of such communication conches. Ouyang Shuo kept 2 and prepared to give them to Bing when he returned. He was sure that the little girl would like such a fun gift. Ouyang Shuo gave the remaining communication conches to Zheng He. Once the order was given, the 4 naval battalions quickly advanced. At this time, the Spanish fleet was under the protection of the 5th battle group, trembling as it sailed towards land. Around the 20 Spanish large ships were densely packed with more than 6,000 small boats. It was a spectacular sight. At this time, a roar came from the sky above the fleet. The players looked up and saw a dolphin-shaped aircraft circling in the sky. What is that? A dolphin or a plane? The players were dumbfounded. Oh my God, do you guys think that is an enemy reconnaissance plane? Someone asked uncertainly. Reconnaissance plane? Are you kidding me? The backward Eastern countries? There were also people who didn't believe it. The backward Easterners are still using heavy cannons. How could they have made airplanes? Cough. Someone reminded him, don't forget, not wearing anything completed the Lost Atlantis storyline mission. Just because the Easterners can't build aircraft doesn't mean that the Atlanteans can't. The surrounding players were instantly silenced. Who cares? The other party is definitely up to no good. Use the cannons to blast them down. Pep said, that's right. Blast him to death. Let's see if he can still be so arrogant. Someone echoed. The Lord player next to them looked at the 2 combat players as if they were idiots. What's wrong? Pep was very unhappy and urged, hurry up and give the order to fire. One of the older lords couldn't stand it anymore. He put his hand to his forehead and wailed, Brother, do you think this is the real world? The cannons in the game don't have the ability to hit a plane that's hundreds of meters high. In the real world, it was not until the early 20th century that the first anti-aircraft cannon was born. Trying to use the artillery of the 16th century to hit a plane? It probably wouldn't even be able to shoot down a balloon. How do you know if you don't try? Pep was stubborn and liked to do things in a one-track mind. Then let's try it so that you'll give up. The Lord who had just replied was easy to talk to. Fire. At the command, the cannons all fired. The result was, of course, futile. The Spanish artillery of the 16th century still used live ammunition. The cannonball shot out and soared into the air. It flew less than 200 meters high before drawing a parabola and falling downward. Looking at the direction, it was going to fall into the surrounding group of small boats. Hurry up and get out of the way. Someone exclaimed. F***CK. Someone cursed. It was too late. The cannonball fell into the group of small boats at an alarming speed and exploded a big hole. In an instant, 3 small boats were completely destroyed and nearly 100 people were killed. The Spanish players wanted to cry, but had no tears. Even Pep was a little embarrassed. Who the F***CK gave the order to fire. I'm not done with you. The surviving players below cursed. Damn, they were almost scared out of their wits. Forget it. Let's follow. The Spanish players had completely given up. In the sky above the fleet, Ouyang Shua sat in the cockpit of the pseudo-aircraft. He could not help but laugh when he saw the enemy's cannonball falling into his position. The Spanish are really creative. Ouyang Shua took out a communication conch and issued an assembly order. Everyone, hurry to the designated coordinates immediately. The target is already in position. At 11 in the morning, under Ouyang Shua's personal command, the ocean-going fleet finally caught up with the Spanish fleet. They formed an airtight encirclement and trapped the other party. In the distant sky, a golden dragon flag appeared. It was even more dazzling against the sunlight. It's the ocean-going fleet of Shanghai City. The players exclaimed. Everything had been revealed. The soldiers' eyes were filled with despair. The scorching sun was in the sky, shining brightly. However, the Spanish soldiers felt a chill in their hearts. The invincible fleet is finished. Alvaro closed his eyes, as if he could not bear to see the tragedy that was about to happen. What's there to be afraid of? We still have more than 20 large ships. At most, we'll fight it out with them. Pep was a complete warmonger. He did not know what fear was at all. How do we fight it out? They can overturn all the small ships around us with a single round of cannons. But we can't just sit and wait for death. Pep was indignant. Killing one is one. That's right. The Spanish are not cowards. We will fight to the end. In this desperate situation, the proud Spanish did not disgrace the glory of their ancestors. After all, they still had some backbone. Just when the Spanish decided to fight to the end, Ouyang Shua's voice came from above. Players below, listen up. You have been surrounded. Don't struggle in vain. Otherwise, don't blame us for killing you. Shanghai City has no intention of fighting to the end with your country. I believe you all know why this war started. Shanghai City has no intention of fighting in the Mediterranean Sea, but we will not allow others to trample on our dignity. From now on, as long as you leave the warship and surrender immediately, Shanghai City will allow you to redeem your lives with gold coins. The Spanish players looked at each other in dismay. Humans were like this. When they were really at a dead end, they would definitely fight with their lives. Suddenly hearing that there was a chance of survival, their determination immediately dissipated. Even Pep, who was the most belligerent, was somewhat silent. Pep had a substitute doll with him, so he was naturally unafraid of death. However, as the team leader, he had to consider the lives of his subordinates. Pep circulated his battle chi and asked loudly, "The one above is Marquis Lianzhou, right? Tell me, how do you propose a ransom?" Every player, regardless of level, identity, or status, will have a ransom of 200 gold coins. However, Ouyang Shua did not have the energy to distinguish between ordinary players, lords, or guild leaders. If this was before Gaia introduced the achievement point redemption time limit, such a ransom was probably unbearable for ordinary players. But now, if they clenched their teeth, they could afford it. In comparison, a ransom of 200 gold coins was much more cost-effective than reincarnation. What do you think? Pep asked the other bigwigs. I think it's doable. Isn't there an old saying in China? Where there's life, there's hope. Shanghai City is exploiting us today, but one day we will get back double. This person was also an expert in China. Well said. Ask what about the native army? Can they also use gold coins to redeem their lives? A lore player asked. Pep nodded and looked up to ask Ouyang Shua, how about the native army? How much gold coins per person? In my eyes, they're all treated equally. They are all 200 gold coins per person, Ouyang Shua said slowly. That's too much. Some lords expressed their dissatisfaction on the spot. The loss of players reincarnating was huge, so they could bear with the ransom of 200 gold coins per person. But the NPC army? What a joke. Nurturing a soldier would not exceed 50 gold coins. Ouyang Shua smiled when he saw this. In fact, he had no intention of letting the Spanish NPC army return in one piece. If that happened, wouldn't it be releasing a tiger back into the mountains? He liked money, but he was not someone who did not know what was important. Ouyang Shua did not release the Spanish players because he was greedy for the ransom. Shanghai City wanted to open up the ocean trade, so it was impossible for them to really fall out with Spain. If they really killed all the Spanish players, there would probably be no room for negotiation. Not to mention whether Shanghai City had the strength to take down Spain. Even if they could, it was impossible. Once a full-scale war broke out, it was obvious that not only the Mediterranean countries, but the entire Europe would also move. On this point, Europe was extremely united, and they definitely would not allow outsiders to invade the continent. Thus, when dealing with the Spanish issue, Ouyang Shua had to think carefully. Everything that Shanghai City did had to be reasonable, so that the other European countries could not find fault with it. Marquis Lianzhou, is there no room for discussion? Pep asked. No. Ouyang Shua's attitude was resolute. Those who are willing to pay the ransom, drive the boat north to trade. Those who are not willing, stay where you are. If you are willing to submit to Shanghai City, I will welcome you. The Spanish players were speechless. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually dared to poach the Spanish players in public. When the native soldiers and sailors heard this, their eyes flashed and their expressions changed. Pep smiled bitterly. Everyone, this is the situation. Make your own decisions. Chapter 665. Ouyang Shua's words caused the atmosphere in the Spanish fleet to suddenly become strange. The Spanish overlord players noticed that the soldiers under their command were looking at them strangely. If they were forced to rush forward and fight with the enemy, it would immediately cause a mutiny. Even the adventure-type players felt a little uneasy. After all, during the evacuation of a large sailboat, the players and the sailors had a fierce, bloody conflict. The relationship between the two sides had long been like a taut string that could break at any moment. Now that they had the support of Shanghai City, who knew what crazy things these natives would do. Cough. Everyone, hurry up and pay the ransom and leave. I don't want to stay in this damn place for another moment. Pep glanced at the overlord players with a faint hint of warning. Forget it, so be it. Seeing this, the overlord players had no choice but to compromise with a bitter expression. Just like that, another spectacle appeared on the sea. The ocean-going fleet specially set up a toll station in the north. No matter who sat on the boat, players, or NPCs, all small boats that passed through would be charged 200 gold coins per person. When it came to the Navy Admiral Alvaro, they were stopped. What? You want to go back on your word? The accompanying overlord's face was gloomy, and his tone was somewhat unfriendly. In this war, the overlord players suffered the most. Not only did they lose the battleships and cannons that the territory had spent a lot of money to build, but even the army under their command had to reluctantly give up because of the ransom. They only took a small number of elite soldiers, and the rest of the army was given to the enemy for nothing. This was really hard to swallow, but in the face of the general situation, they had to bow their heads. If they really fought, the first to disagree would probably be the adventure-type players. The overlord who spoke was called Casillas, the second-ranked overlord in Spain, and also the most powerful overlord along the coast. The Navy Admiral Alvaro was his general. Others can pass, but not this old general, the guard said as he pointed at Alvaro. Why? The Marquis said that he wants to invite the old general to the ocean-going fleet as a guest. Don't go too far. Casillas was furious when he heard this. Even a fool would not believe such a ridiculous reason like inviting him to be a guest. Shanghai City was obviously envious of Alvaro and wanted to detain him by force. This is the Marquis's decree. We are just following orders. The guard was unmoved. You. Casillas was so angry that he laughed. Fine. Let Marquis Lianzhou talk to me. The Marquis is not seeing guests for the time being. The guard was still as stiff as ever. The situation was in a stalemate. The guards neither let him pass nor forcefully snatch him away. In the face of Casillas's roar, They even turned a deaf ear to it. Just like a steel guard, they stood still despite the wind and rain. As such, the players at the back of the queue could only wait. After a long time, they became unhappy. Since he couldn't see Ouyang Shua, the players could only persuade Casillas to take a step back. Forget it. It has already come to this. What's the point of arguing? He's just a guest. Maybe he'll be back in a few days. That's right. Don't reject his kind invitation. To be honest, this kind of persuasion was as fake as it could be. The behavior of the Spanish players was just like an old saying in China: a dead friend is better than a poor friend. The players now only wanted to escape from this place. As for the loss of others, why would they care about it? They would only resent Casillas for being unreasonable and create waves. Gossip was a fearful thing, and the emotions of the world were like blades. It was not just talk. Casillas' face was flushed, and he gritted his teeth. With his self-restraint, he was about to explode. Alvaro was the first admiral of the Spanish Navy and the trump card of the estate. How could he easily give up? The longer the time dragged, the more agitated the players became. In the end, not only the ordinary players, but even the guild leaders began to come forward to persuade Casillas. Forget it. We lost this time. We can only let ourselves be trampled on. Yeah, there's an old saying in China: a little impatience will spoil great plans. It was that China expert again. The other party is determined to keep the commander. There won't be any result if this confrontation continues. In case the other party runs out of patience and forces us to stay, then we'll be in big trouble. The words of kind persuasion were like a knife stabbing Casillas' chest, making him want to vomit blood. Shameless, shameless. Casillas' hatred for these compatriots even exceeded his hatred for Ouyang Shua, who was the most hateful person in the world. They didn't know what you experienced, didn't know what you suffered, and what unfair treatment you received. They just kept persuading you, be magnanimous. Magnanimous your ass. In reality, this kind of person will be struck by lightning. Casillas was facing a group of such people. He wanted to resist to the end and simply break up and drag this group of abominable guys to hell together. Unfortunately, he was a rational person after all. As a lord, Casillas was always vigilant of himself not to be impulsive, let alone emotional. If he really offended this group of players, the future situation of his estate in Spain could be imagined. He was bound to suffer this loss. Marquilionjo, I'm not done with you. Casillas said the harsh words and left without looking back. The protagonist of the incident, Alvaro, did not say a word from beginning to end. It seemed that no one thought that they should ask Alvaro what he thought. Seeing the Lord turn around and leave angrily, Alvaro sighed softly and went to Dragon Head under the respectful guidance of the guards. The scene was restored to order. It was not until 2 o'clock in the afternoon that those who should leave were gone. In the end, a total of more than 30,000 players and more than 4,000 NPC soldiers paid the ransom. The total amount of ransom received by Ouyang Shua reached a terrifying 7 million gold coins. There was no doubt that this was the largest war wealth in the history of Shanghai City. The 2 million gold coins spent in Atlantis was no longer painful for Ouyang Shua. The net profit was 5 million gold coins. Ouyang Shua calculated the funds in his storage bag and found that he had become the richest man in the world. There were originally 1 million gold coins left in the storage bag. Adding the 7 million gold coins, there was a total of 8 million gold coins. In addition, there was still a sum of money, which was the trade income. Before going out to sea, Shanghai City purchased more than 500,000 gold coins worth of various materials and replenished a batch of pepper and spices in Star State County. By the time they passed the Mediterranean Sea, these goods were basically sold out. The overall profit had increased by about 6 times, and the trade volume was roughly 5 million gold coins. Among them, the purchase of greenstones and other goods from the West had cost 500,000 gold coins. After calculating, there were 3 million gold coins left. In other words, there were a total of 11 million gold coins in Ouyang Shua's storage bag. No one would believe it if they said it out. What was more terrifying was that Ouyang Shua's journey of earning money was far from over. It was really unknown to what extent Ouyang Shua's wealth would be accumulated by the end of the voyage. It was no wonder that people said that the voyage was a crazy journey of plundering global wealth. In history, when Spain was at its strongest, thousands of Spanish galleons from all over the world shipped countless gold back to Spain for Philip II and the Spanish nobles to squander. When England dominated the sea, the global wealth swept away was even more incalculable. Right now, Shanghai City seemed to be quietly walking on such a path. In addition to the ransom, there were also 23 Spanish galleons, each equipped with 20 Spanish cannons. In addition, there were also 36 Carrack galleons, each equipped with 10 cannons. There were more than 800 Spanish cannons alone. In addition to these ready-made cannons, when a matter here was over, Ouyang Shua also planned to send a team of frogmen to the place where the 4 major battle groups of the Spanish fleet sank to salvage the cannons that had sunk to the bottom of the sea. That was the real big fish. Preliminary estimates said that there were no less than 5,000 cannons. These cannons were forged with the entire Spanish nation's resources, and now they all benefited Shanghai City. War windfall. It's really war windfall. Ouyang Shua muttered to himself. In addition to the warships and cannons, there were also the naval officers and soldiers who were abandoned by the Lord. All of them were taken in by Shanghai City. Since pirates could turn over a new leaf, why would Ouyang Shua mind the Spanish officers and soldiers changing sides? In the end, a total of more than 56,000 naval officers and soldiers joined Shanghai City. Along with them were more than 20,000 sailors, first officers, and other senior crew members. In other words, as long as they were equipped with warships, Shanghai City could immediately form half a fleet. These naval officers and sailors were the treasures that Ouyang Shua had spent a lot of effort on. For Ouyang Shua, there was no end to the money. Building a truly powerful navy was the fundamental guarantee of everything. Defeating the Spanish invincible fleet was the best opportunity for Shanghai City's navy to enter the Mediterranean Sea. Weren't these naval officers and sailors the most valuable asset? Ouyang Shua did not think that the Spanish would really give up after suffering such a huge loss. Next, Ouyang Shua would take a series of actions to curb the Spanish's retaliation, re-establish the order of the Mediterranean Sea, and allow Shanghai City's military presence to be recognized by the Mediterranean countries. This was very difficult, but Ouyang Shua was very confident. Now, he not only held one good card in his hand, but several good cards. Ouyang Shua still had to carefully plan how to operate it to ensure that nothing went wrong. Before that, Ouyang Shua had to meet another person, and that was Alvaro, who he had forcefully detained. Whether Ouyang Shua's next plan could be successfully carried out largely depended on whether this stubborn old man was willing to cooperate. Only by truly subduing Alvaro would he be considered to have succeeded halfway. Obviously, this was not an easy task. Chapter 666. 3:00 in the afternoon, in a reception room of the Dragon Head. After everything was ready, the fleet set off to the place where the Spanish invincible fleet sank to salvage the cannons. Ouyang Shua finally had time to meet Alvaro. "I've heard a lot about you." Ouyang Shua smiled. After learning about Alvaro's origin, Ouyang Shua's interest suddenly increased. In ancient times, China had always lacked admirals, and the limited few were basically searched by Shanghai City. However, Western countries were rich in admirals. Shanghai City dominated the land of the 4 seas, and naturally, it should have a global vision and accept talent from all over the world. Therefore, Ouyang Shua didn't mind having a Spanish admiral under his command. Alvaro, on the other hand, was stumped and unwilling to give in. "Old Admiral, facts have proven that the Spanish invincible fleet is already outdated and no longer has its glory. Now it can only show its power in the Mediterranean. But our Shanghai City is different. The fleet crosses the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans, across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This is a true global fleet." Ouyang Shua said. Alvaro's eyes moved. So what? So what? Leading a global fleet is the dream of every Marine admiral. Could it be that the general is old and no longer has this ambition? Ouyang Shua laughed. Humph, old admiral, as long as you agree to join Shanghai City. This marquis promises that the fleet will only take the port of Gibraltar and will no longer attack the Spanish mainland. How about it? Ouyang Shua was ready to take a step back. Originally, he didn't think that he could destroy Spain in one fell swoop. The strategic goal of suppressing the arrogance of the Spanish invincible fleet has already been achieved. It can be imagined that within the next year, the Spanish invincible fleet will stop fighting in the Mediterranean. If he can temporarily retreat in exchange for the loyalty of an admiral, Ouyang Shua felt that it was worth it. Is this true? Alvaro couldn't believe it. The Spanish invincible fleet was wiped out in this battle. The long coastline was almost undefended at this time and could only be ravaged by the ocean-going fleet. At this time, the other party is not going to continue to expand the victory. Alvaro looked at Ouyang Shua's eyes full of curiosity. This person is so young. Can he resist such temptation? Ouyang Shua saw this and smiled indifferently. This marquis never lies. Old general, you should know that in Shanghai City, mutants and natives are all equal existences. There is absolutely no distinction between them. Ouyang Shua's words poked at the scar in Alvaro's heart. The performance of the Spaniards in this battle, especially their indifferent attitude towards the sailors, really disappointed Alvaro. All right, I promise you. Alvaro raised his head with a resolute look in his eyes. I only hope that you will not forget your promise today. Otherwise, I will not give up even if I have to risk my life. Of course. Ouyang Shua nodded. General Alvaro pays his respects to the Marquis. Alvaro did as the Romans did and formally paid his respects. Ouyang Shua nodded and checked Alvaro's attributes. Name, Alvaro de Bazan, Emperor level. Title, the father of Spanish soldiers dynasty, 16th century / Spain identity. General of Shanghai City profession. Special general loyalty, 65 points commander, 87 strength, 75 intelligence, 75 politics, 65 specialty, naval battle, increase the range and power of the cannons by 35, increase the speed of the warship by 25, increase the defense of the warship by 25, increase the morale of the Navy in naval battles by 30, increase the tactics of the Navy by 15, weapon, Spanish sword of formation, evaluation. Alvaro de Bazan, 1st Marquis of Santa Cruz. Proficient in tactics, talented in formulating plans, and outstanding leadership and management skills. He was Philip II's most capable general. Gaia used a unified standard to rate the generals of various countries. At the same time, it would make a second revision based on the country's national strength, scale, and historical heritage. As such, some countries' historical generals were only at the emperor rank or even the king rank. If they could not even reach the king rank, Gaia would directly revise them to the king rank. In other words, regardless of the size of a country, they would at least have a king rank general. Spain was once a maritime hegemon, a powerful country in Europe, and it had a certain historical heritage. Although it could not compare to the giant China, Gaia's overall evaluation of it was still extremely high. The entire country had a god-ranked general, the Spanish god of war, Duke Alva, Fernando, who was known as the Blood Butcher. Other than that, there were several emperor-ranked generals, and Alvaro was one of them. Without a doubt, Alvaro's addition to the Shanghai City Navy was of extraordinary significance. Just as Ouyang Shua was about to discuss the job arrangements with Alvaro, a system announcement spread throughout the world. Global announcement. Congratulations to the feudal lord of the China server for successfully subduing the Spanish Navy's Admiral Alvaro, becoming the first feudal lord in the world to subdue another country's historical general. Special reward, 10,000 achievement points, 50,000 reputation points, and a king rank summoning amulet. Congratulations to the player. The moment the announcement was released, the entire world was shocked. What shocked the players was not just that Alvaro had subdued another country's general, but the hidden message behind the announcement. It was obvious that in the war between Shanghai City and Spain, Spain had been unexpectedly defeated. As the news of the war spread on the forums, the conflict between Shanghai City and Spain had long been known to the entire world. Before the war, no one believed that Shanghai City could defeat the powerful Spain like they had conquered Star. Especially for the Mediterranean countries, the Spanish invincible fleet was a nightmarish existence. It was because of this that the European countries had no intention of intervening. All they did was sit quietly by the side and watch the show. But in the end, Spain's most powerful admiral had been subdued by Shanghai City's feudal lord, Alvaro. The development of the matter could be said to be full of twists and turns. Various parties had different reactions to this. As soon as the announcement was released, the Mediterranean countries were the most shocked. Players from Italy, Greece, France, Egypt, and Turkey had different thoughts. Their first thought was to confirm what kind of impact the Spanish invincible fleet had encountered in this battle. Can the Spanish invincible fleet continue to dominate the Mediterranean? They wanted to confirm this so that they could adjust their respective naval strategies in time. If possible, they could take advantage of this opportunity to rise. Among them, the most excited was France. In the middle and late 17th century, the Kingdom of France had also been glorious. In those glorious 50 years, the French Navy started from a group of broken sampans. Under the protection of Richelieu, Colbert, and the Marquis de Senel, and under the illumination of the Sun King Louis XIV, the French Navy had defeated various great powers of the sea, Spain, the Netherlands, and even England. It grew into a naval power that once controlled the Atlantic and Mediterranean waters and was the #1 naval power at that time. However, in the Battle of La and Cape Verde in 1692, the emerging French Navy was defeated by the Anglo-Dutch fleet and thus lost control of the sea. The French Navy quickly withered in the dust of history. Because of this, the feudal lords of France were more eager to rise again than any other Mediterranean country. French Quarter, Vic City. As the #1 feudal lord of France, Henry had also shown his face on the global stage and was even ranked among the top 10 feudal lords in the world. But in the Mediterranean Sea, Henry was extremely low-key. It was not that he did not want to be high-profile, but he was overwhelmed by the Spanish invincible fleet. With this announcement, Henry finally saw an opportunity for France to enter the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, as early as the start of the war between Shanghai City and Spain, Henry had been paying attention to this great war. Marquis Lienzo completed the large-scale storyline mission, The Lost Atlantis, which gave Henry a glimmer of hope. Even so, he did not act rashly. When the announcement was made, Henry finally decided to attack. "Come in. Here." The clerk walked in. 3 things. Henry raised 3 fingers. "First, send out all the scouts. We must get to the bottom of the Spanish War." Henry hooked his first finger. "Understood." Second, order the Gallic fleet to enter the first level of combat readiness and be ready to attack the Mediterranean Sea at any time. The Gallic fleet was the secret weapon of Vic City. It had been hidden by Henry all along, and now it was time to show its power. Third, send someone to contact the ocean fleet of Shanghai City and show their goodwill, Henry said finally. The clerk's eyes narrowed, and he did not ask any questions. He turned around and left. In the dim study, Henry muttered to himself, "Marquis Lienzo, don't let me down." Apart from the Mediterranean Sea countries, the European countries were also alarmed. England region, Castle Avic. Subduing the Spanish Navy? Interesting. William sat in the study on the highest floor of the castle, looking lazy. The ocean fleet's next stop should be here, right? Yes. The clerk opposite him looked solemn. There was no doubt that Shanghai City had been recognized as a war maniac, but the troublemaker title had long been recognized by the players of all countries. Wherever the ocean fleet went, trouble followed. As the terminal of the ocean fleet, how could England be free of trouble in the future? "Sir, we should make plans early," the clerk advised. William raised an eyebrow, picked up the red wine on the table, and slowly took a sip. He said lazily, "What plans? We might even get a big deal." "Big deal?" The clerk was puzzled. William did not intend to explain anything. He changed the topic and asked casually, Did Annie go out again? The clerk immediately broke out in cold sweat. Please forgive me, sir. Miss Annie seized 5 warships the day before yesterday and led her Iron Lady out to the sea to eliminate the pirates. What nonsense! William reprimanded, but there was no hint of reproach on his face. It was obvious that he doted on his sister. Remember to arrange for the fleet to escort them. Yes, sir. The clerk did not hesitate. Chapter 667. In terms of shock, the Spanish mainland was the most shocked. The Spanish invincible fleet, which was still on its way back, was naturally ashamed when it heard the system announcement, but they had already been humiliated once and quickly adapted to it. What's bound to come will always come. Casillas was even more furious. His eyes were red, and he was about to burst into flames. No one knew if he was angry at Ouyang Shuo for being unreasonable, or angry at Alvaro for not having integrity, or even angry at his compatriots for being too selfish. Or all three. The ones who really couldn't accept it were the Spanish players. Such a system announcement was undoubtedly a slap in the face to the proud and prideful Spaniards. What the hell is going on? The Spaniards were dumbfounded. Didn't the invincible fleet vow to completely crush the ocean fleet before the expedition? How did their own admiral become the enemy in a blink of an eye? Was the fleet of Tortosa ambushed and had a problem, or was the entire invincible fleet defeated? The Spaniards, more than any other country's players, were eager to know the truth of the war. The city of Tortosa was Casillas' territory. The Spanish domestic forum directly exploded, and the panicked Spaniards were eager to know the truth, eager for someone to tell them what was going on. Finally, the players who were still drifting at sea could not bear the pressure exerted by the domestic players on the forum and simply disclosed the war process directly on the forum. As soon as the news came out, the whole country was shocked. Is today April Fool's Day? Our invincible naval fleet was annihilated in a single day. Oh God, don't make such a joke. Tell me this is not true. The proud Spaniards simply couldn't accept such a fact. Subsequently, the players posted photos of the Spanish galleons sinking to the bottom of the sea on the forum. In the endless sea, countless Spanish galleons and Clark galleons sank to the bottom of the sea at the same time, revealing only the sails, indicating their identity and former glory. Such a shocking photo directly dragged the Spaniards into the unknown abyss of hell. My God, it's unbelievable. Is the other party the devil? How is it possible that our invincible battleships sank like this? Oh my God, who can tell me what witchcraft the enemy cast on the battleship? The proud Spaniards couldn't wake up from such a huge blow. In other words, they would rather not wake up than face such a cruel reality. The invincible fleet, the dominator of the Mediterranean Sea, and the most brilliant diamond on the crown of Spain, had all sunk overnight, completely becoming a thing of the past and turning into a pile of rotten wood. The proud empire seemed to be heading towards desolation. The only ones who were still sober were probably the Spanish media. They combined the information disclosed on the forum and wrote a piece of heavy news that the deaf could hear. Without exception, the pictures accompanying the news all used the despairing picture of the shipwreck from the forum. The darkest day in Spain. Glory collapses, invincibility destroys. Without the invincible fleet, how will the empire continue to control the sea? Who will save Spain's faded glory? The answer was obvious. The only thing that could save Spain now was the royal navy of the Spanish royal family. They were still in the midst of the Kingdom War, and the royal capital's army could theoretically be mobilized. The only problem was that Shanghai City did not attack Madrid. Therefore, according to the rules of the Kingdom War, the two sides were still in the stage of a local war, and the royal capital's army would not intervene in the battlefield. The desperate Spaniards couldn't care less, especially the players in Madrid. They gathered together and petitioned in front of the palace, asking the great Philip II to order the Spanish Royal Navy to attack. Resolutely defend the glory of the empire. We are willing to be the vanguard and pledge our lives to follow you. Only your majesty has mercy. Blood for blood, Spain will never back down. The banners put up by the players were more radical than the other. In order to increase their persuasion, the players even cut their wrists and stained the banners red with their blood. At the same time, countless bloody handprints were printed on them. The proud Spaniards decided to practice the medieval chivalry, never compromise, and fight to the death. Philip II of the secluded dwelling palace did not know how to deal with the players' petition. With his belligerent nature, he naturally wanted to agree to the players' petition, but he was limited by the system's rules and could not. The rules set by Gaia were the highest rules that NPCs must follow. We can only blame the inhuman fleet for being too disappointing, Philip II said helplessly. In the end, the Deep Palace could only respond in silence. The Spanish players, who had been shouting at the top of their lungs for a day, could not hide the despair in their eyes when they saw that the palace did not respond. Is Spain really going to be finished? Some people lamented, and some even committed suicide in front of the palace square. The smear of blood on the stone steps became the last afterglow of the Spanish chivalry. Dazzling, and sad. At this moment, the defeated army on the small boats finally arrived at the Spanish port. When the players received the news, they were naturally furious. Someone took a picture of the scene of 6,000 to 7,000 small boats entering the port and posted it on the forum. This completely ignited the anger in the hearts of the Spaniards. How can the shame of the empire come back? It's a shame to be associated with those who live without purpose. Eternal sinners of the empire, hurry up and commit suicide to atone for your sins. More and more players gathered at the port, collectively denouncing the defeated army. If it were not for the army maintaining order at the scene, a bloody conflict would have broken out. The one who lost the battle was naturally ashamed. They also felt wronged. Most of the players still did not understand why they were defeated. They just woke up one night and saw warships sinking one after another. Then they were surrounded by the ocean fleet of Shanghai City. The whole process was completely confusing, isn't it? We are also very innocent. The players shouted in their hearts, but they did not dare to express it in public. They were full of passion and went to battle, thinking of winning glory for the country. Who would have thought that not only would they lose 200 gold coins before fighting a battle, but they would also become the sinners and shame of the empire in the blink of an eye? How could outsiders understand this kind of grievance? Helpless, the angry domestic players had already lost their minds. How could they listen to their excuses? In response to the defeated soldiers were vicious curses, countless rotten tomatoes, rotten eggs, and rotten cabbages. In humiliation, the soldiers quickly fled the scene through the teleportation formation with rotten leaves on their heads. They either returned to their territories, returned to the guild encampment, or simply returned to their huts to lick their wounds alone. Even if they went back, they still had to bear the strange looks from their friends and relatives around them. This day was really unbearable for the soldiers of the invincible fleet. The bustling port was more than half empty in less than half an hour. The players who had no target to vent their anger wandered unconsciously in the port. Their eyes were blank and helpless, and they did not know where to go. The small boats docked at the port were unusually eye-catching. Burn them, someone suggested. That's right, just burn them all. I get angry just looking at them. The desperate players needed to vent the accumulated anger in their hearts through radical actions. Naturally, many people responded to their call. In an instant, thousands of small boats were all set on fire in less than half an hour. The raging fire soared into the sky, dyeing the port completely red. Countless ferocious and desperate faces were reflected in the fire. The fire spread, and no one went to extinguish it. It even spread to the port facilities, turning them into ashes. The charred port became the most vivid portrayal of the current situation of the empire. As night fell, the players who were unwilling to give up gradually dispersed. Even more turbulent waves were slowly brewing and fermenting in the night. Tonight, no one could sleep. The first thing the Overlord players did when they returned to their territories was to issue an emergency recruitment order overnight. At the same time, they ordered the shipyards to work 24 hours a day to build as many warships as possible. They knew too well that without the protection of the Navy, the coastal territories would become the first target of the ocean fleet. If they did not step up their preparations for war, it was very likely that they would not even be able to keep their territories. Thousands of craftsmen were mobilized and began to build war fortresses along the port. The current Spain could not afford a second failure. If they lost at sea, they must defend the land. Otherwise, the empire would be finished. For the empire, and for their lives, the coastal overlords gambled everything. All the funds in the territory's inventory were spent and transformed into soldiers, warships, and war fortresses. Reporters from various major media outlets also took action overnight. There were too many details and secrets waiting for them to uncover in this strange naval battle. Under the guise of revealing the truth of the war for the people, the reporters began to break through the defenses of the players who participated in the war one by one. Early the next morning, the headlines of all the major media outlets published shocking news. The matter of the sky-high ransom was unsurprisingly dug out by the reporters and made public. This was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire. The domestic players who had just calmed down took to the streets to protest again. The players who participated in the war this time were like street rats, condemned and disliked by the domestic players, and did not dare to go out at all. Of course, there were also rational media outlets. They did not focus on gossip, and they would not endlessly provoke the sensitive nerves of the players for the sake of newspaper sales. Their eyes were focused on the battlefield. The most fundamental point of doubt was, how did the invincible warships sink? The players interviewed ordinary players, guild leaders, and lords. From their oral accounts, the truth of the matter was gradually restored, and the fog of war was uncovered. The Spanish players looked at the war report with a blank expression. There was no doubt that their enemy, the ocean fleet of Shanghai City, had mastered incredible technology or equipment. Such tactics were simply the nemesis of warships on the sea. P.S. It's a new week, asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Brothers, work hard. Don't let our votes fall. Chapter 668. The Spaniard got to the bottom of the matter and finally locked onto Atlantis. Other than that, there is no other possibility. The Spaniard was certain. When the truth came out, the Spaniards had mixed feelings. If they really lost to Shanghai City's fleet, the proud Spaniards would probably find it hard to calm down. In their eyes, the eastern countries represented by Shanghai City in the game were synonymous with backwardness and ignorance. However, if the Atlantis civilization played a decisive role in the war, it would be a different story. In the eyes of the Westerners, the Atlantis civilization represented an advanced civilization system. Now that I think about it, it's not too shameful. The Spaniard comforted himself. As a result, the Spaniards had mixed feelings about the reappearance of Atlantis. They had a love-hate relationship with the culprit who had caused the destruction of the invincible fleet. The battle with Shanghai City's fleet had caused Spain to lag behind the other countries in the Mediterranean Sea in terms of the exploration of Atlantis. If they didn't act now, they would only be left with the leftovers. The problem was that the destruction of the invincible armada made it difficult for the Spaniards to go out to sea. Not to mention, Shanghai City's fleet was still lurking in the waters of Gibraltar, eyeing them covetously. Could it be that we have to let Shanghai City extort them again? The Spaniard wanted to spit blood at the thought. Right now, we don't have to worry about whether or not we can go out to sea. Instead, we have to guard against Shanghai City's fleet attacking the coastal cities. The Kingdom War is imminent, so let's leave the Atlantis Island matter for later. You're right. It was only then that the Spaniards realized that the Kingdom War was far from over. The entirety of Spain immediately fell into a frenzy of preparations for war, and they were determined to snipe the invading enemies on land. Shanghai City dares to invade us? We'll make sure they never return. It had to be said that even if a proud race encountered setbacks, it was difficult for them to change their nature. With the Spanish causing such a ruckus, the spies of the various countries were relieved. They didn't have to spend much effort on it. The entire Mediterranean Sea knew what was going on, and the relevant information was quickly reported to the lords of the various countries. This time, the Mediterranean Sea was truly in an uproar. The Spanish invincible fleet has been completely annihilated. The glory is gone. This news was too shocking. Not only France, but Italy, Greece, Egypt, and other countries also saw the light to attack the Mediterranean. It quickly became the consensus of all the countries in the Mediterranean Sea to take this opportunity to break Spain's sea control in one fell swoop. Of course, there were also lords who were wary of Shanghai City's fleet. Even the invincible Spanish fleet had been defeated by the ocean-going fleet. Would there really be space for them to move about in the Mediterranean Sea in the future? I'm just afraid that we'll reject the tiger at the front door and the wolf at the back door, someone said worriedly. On the one hand, they were afraid of the power of Shanghai City's fleet, but on the other hand, they were unwilling to give up on the opportunity to rise in the Mediterranean Sea. Just like that, the various forces met frequently and began to form alliances. The entire Mediterranean Sea became treacherous. On the other hand, Lord Henry of France was extremely resolute. As soon as he received the news, he immediately recalled his liaison officer and increased the conditions that he promised in order to form a strategic alliance with Shanghai City. The Mediterranean Sea was about to overturn, yet Ouyang Shua seemed as if nothing had happened, and he continued to act according to plan. In Dragonhead's reception room, Ouyang Shua and Alvaro were discussing the appointment. Alvaro was born in Spain and was very familiar with the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. In history, it was under Alvaro's plan that the Spanish invincible fleet left the Mediterranean Sea and set foot in the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, Ouyang Shua had no reason to transfer Alvaro back to his country. Otherwise, it would be a reckless waste of God's resources. The best choice was to form a new fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. Ouyang Shua planned to form a fifth fleet under the Nanyang Navy, the Mediterranean Fleet, with Alvaro as the admiral of the Mediterranean Fleet. The first batch of backbone of the Mediterranean Fleet was more than 56,000 Spanish officers and soldiers who had already submitted to Shanghai City, as well as more than 20,000 sailors, first officers, and other senior crew members. Of course, according to the usual practice, the Mediterranean Fleet also had to be mixed. Ouyang Shua asked Zheng he to select a group of backbone generals from the ocean-going fleet to join the Mediterranean Fleet. At the same time, it was stipulated that more than half of the backbone generals and soldiers of the Mediterranean Fleet must be Shanghai City's native officers and soldiers. In this way, the Mediterranean Fleet would be composed of three types of personnel: the Spanish Navy, the native officers and soldiers of Shanghai City, and the pirate prisoners of war in the Gulf of Aden. The three would integrate and form a healthy internal competition. The Mediterranean Fleet was isolated in the sea, not to mention that Ouyang Shua was only acquainted with Alvaro. Even the generals he was familiar with would have to take some precautions. The shortage of manpower in the ocean-going fleet would naturally be filled by the Spanish Navy. According to the establishment of the Shanghai City Navy, a full-fledged fleet would have a total of 110,000 soldiers and 14,000 crew members. The fleet would have 5 formations, each consisting of 22,000 soldiers and 2,800 crew members. According to the current number of soldiers, the Mediterranean Fleet could only form 2.5 formations for the time being. Ouyang Shua gave Alvaro 3 formations, and he would find a way to fill the missing 10,000 soldiers in the future. The Mediterranean Fleet's patrol area was not only the Mediterranean Sea, but also the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It could even be said that the Navy stationed in Somalia's Friendship City was under the jurisdiction of the Mediterranean Fleet. Needless to say, this would be the fleet with the widest area under the jurisdiction of the Nanyang Navy. The moment he received the appointment, Alvaro's loyalty directly increased by 10 points. He did not expect the Marquis to think so highly of him and give him such an important task as soon as he arrived. Even the current size of the Mediterranean Fleet was comparable to the historical Spanish Invincible Fleet. Not to mention that the Marquis had already promised to fill in the remaining 2 formations when the time was right. Of course, Alvaro was a veteran after all, and he immediately got into character after the appointment. May I ask, the Marquis, how will the Mediterranean Fleet's uniforms, weapons, and warships be settled? Also, how will the fleet station and logistics be arranged? Alvaro was very straightforward. Zheng He, who was beside him, frowned when he heard this. From Zheng He's point of view, Alvaro's words were already somewhat disgraceful. General Alvaro, please watch your words. Don't be rude to the Marquis. Zheng He reminded him. What? Alvaro raised his eyebrows, not understanding what was going on. Ouyang Shua saw this, but he smiled and waved his hand. In fact, this was the cultural difference between the East and the West. Easterners spoke in a reserved manner, and were essentially modest and polite. Westerners spoke bluntly and pursued efficiency. The two had nothing to do with superiority or inferiority, but the cultural difference. Good question, General. The Spanish Navy's uniforms must all be changed. As for the weapons and equipment, General, you can discuss with Governor Zheng He and adjust flexibly according to the characteristics of the soldiers' martial arts. Ouyang Shua said. Alvaro and Zheng He looked at each other and nodded in unison. Understood. Speaking of which, Zheng He was Alvaro's direct superior. As a soldier, Alvaro naturally would not be arrogant the moment he arrived. He had to respect his superior. Alvaro also realized that Zheng He's reminder was actually out of kindness. It seemed that if he wanted to integrate into the system of Shanghai City, he had to take the initiative to get closer to his superior, Zheng He, and learn more from him. The warships needed by the Mediterranean fleet will be built by the shipyard in Somalia's Friendship City. It is estimated that they will all be delivered within 2 months. Ouyang Shua did not intend to use the captured Spanish galleons. Ouyang Shua paused for a moment, then continued. The problems of the fleet station and logistics will be solved together. I have decided to immediately send troops to Gibraltar after salvaging the cannons and retrieve them. The reception room fell silent, and smoke instantly filled the air. On the 29th of July, the ocean-going fleet returned with a full load and once again occupied Gibraltar. The Spanish lord, Juan, had previously left a portion of his troops at the port. When the news of the Invincible Fleet's defeat came, he immediately fled in panic. Before he left, he kidnapped all the civilians and even burned down the port. It seemed that they did not expect to retrieve the port again. The current Gibraltar port was basically a ghost town. Looking at the charred port, Ouyang Shua and the others had different expressions. Alvaro's expression was the most complicated. He did not expect the Spanish to be so resolute. All right, the past can't be chased. Ouyang Shua smiled. Let us build an invincible port that truly guards the throat of the Mediterranean Sea on top of these ruins. In the game, Gibraltar had a huge concave shape, with a huge rolling mountain range surrounding an excellent natural harbor. The port was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, and the other side faced the sea. The mountains were tens of thousands of feet high, and the cliffs were so high that it was difficult for birds to fly. It was perfectly isolated from the interior of Spain, and there was not even a narrow path. At the foot of the mountain was a long and narrow arc of land with an area of less than 50 square kilometers. It was even smaller than Friendship City. Because it was near the sea, the land was heavily saline, and it was difficult for ordinary crops to grow there. In the past, the residents mainly made a living by fishing. At most, they would specially transport some soil from other places and spread it in their vegetable fields to grow some vegetables. Their lives were extremely poor. In the 3rd year of Gaia, where ocean trade had not yet flourished, the strategic position of Gibraltar port had not yet been highlighted. There were very few merchant ships coming and going from the Mediterranean Sea, and it was very difficult for the local residents to buy necessities. Even so, there were still people living there. This was because the wilderness in the game was not a peaceful place. Although Gibraltar was poor, it could be considered a paradise. No one expected it to change owners so many times in a short period of time. Ouyang Shua no longer had time to care about the fate of the civilians that one had kidnapped. What he was thinking about now was how to build this place into a war fortress so that it would not be taken back by the radical Spanish. Chapter 669. The port was still called Gibraltar Port. Apart from that, Ouyang Shua also planned to build a medium-sized city on the limited and long land at the foot of the mountain. It would be used for commerce and trade, as well as the supply center of the Mediterranean fleet. The name of the city was Base City. The base was the center, and it also referred to the foundation. Ouyang Shua had chosen this name because he hoped to build the base city into the foundation of Shanghai City's ocean-going trade in the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Because the Kingdom War had yet to end, Shanghai City's occupation of the harbor was still illegal. There was a possibility that they could change sides at any time. According to the rules of the Kingdom War, the conditions for the Kingdom War to end was either the annihilation of a kingdom or the signing of an armistice treaty, ceding territory, or paying reparations. Only when the Spanish royal family officially recognized Shanghai City's legal occupation of the port of Gibraltar could the construction of the base city enter the fast lane. Only then could the courier stations with the domestic territories be opened. How to accomplish this objective required Ouyang Shua to personally mediate. August 1st, Port of Gibraltar. The blackened Port of Gibraltar turned into a huge construction site. Tens of thousands of sailors took off their military uniforms and turned into workers, completely cleaning up the port facilities and the houses on the empty ground. Ouyang Shua's order was to clean up the base city within 3 days. Ouyang Shua led 2 battalions to Atlantis Island after leaving most of the troops in the base city. For this visit, Ouyang Shua was using the name of the Lord of Shanghai City. In other words, this was an official visit. If the Mediterranean fleet wanted to truly establish itself, it would be impossible without friends in the Mediterranean Sea. If they only relied on the port of Gibraltar, it would be a problem for the fleet to resupply. The Atlantis Island was undoubtedly an excellent ally. In Ouyang Shua's opinion, the two of them could complement each other perfectly. This time, Ouyang Shua didn't visit Atlantis empty-handed. Apart from top-grade tea leaves, top-grade porcelain, and the purest spices that were specially used as gifts, there was also a special gift. After the salvage from the bottom of the sea, the fleet seized more than 5,300 Spanish cannons. The ocean-going fleet left behind 10 Spanish cannons, preparing to bring them back to Shanghai City and hand them over to the No. 7 Research Institute to be dismembered to provide reference for the development of new cannons in Shanghai City. The newly formed Mediterranean fleet left behind 3,000 cannons for their own use. According to the plan, 300 cannons could be installed on the walls of the base city. As for the remaining 2,000 cannons, Ouyang Shua planned to gift 1,000 of them to Atlantis. If these cannons were deployed on the outer ring of islands, it would greatly enhance the defense of Atlantis. After all, the combat marionettes in the outer ring were strategic weapons that could not be used lightly. Atlantis had just risen, so naturally, no one would have any ulterior motives. However, in the middle and later stages of the game, the struggle between the various countries became more and more intense. Heroes rose together, and the Overlord came to the world. At that time, Atlantis, this fat piece of meat, would probably be coveted. Ouyang Shua vaguely remembered that in the 5th year of Gaia in his previous life, Atlantis was threatened by the Spanish. In this life, because of the existence of Ouyang Shua, the Atlantis island had appeared 1.5 years earlier, and the Spanish invincible fleet had been destroyed. Everything had changed. Even so, it did not mean that Atlantis could sit back and relax. The best strategy was to prepare for a rainy day. Kalia seemed to be extremely happy about Ouyang Shua's visit, and he arranged a grand, welcoming ceremony. A bright red carpet was laid from the North Harbor all the way to the palace of the Inner Islands. Kalia even led the kingdom's ministers to personally welcome Ouyang Shua and his party at the port. How can the Marquis of Lian Province be naked? Greetings, Your Majesty. After Ouyang Shua disembarked, he bowed to Kalia to show his respect. Lord, welcome to Atlantis again. Kalia tried his best to control his emotions as he gracefully introduced the kingdom's ministers to Ouyang Shua. Previously, they had hurriedly bid farewell, but they did not have the chance to meet each other. Of course, many of the ministers were actually hastily appointed by Kalia in the past few days. In the land of survival, they were struggling at death's door. How could they have a mood to build a complete kingdom structure? Everything was for the sake of survival. When they reached the ground, everything was different. The Atlanteans had to show their strength and unity to the outside world. All the institutions were set up in a short period of time. Kalia himself was officially crowned king and wore a crown. The island's scientific research institutions, factories, and other important facilities were also undergoing debugging, striving to be put into use as soon as possible. The Atlantis island was recovering at an astonishing speed, bursting with endless vitality. During the greetings, the accompanying divine martial guards and sailors carried boxes of gifts from the ship and piled them up on the dock. 1,000 Spanish cannons were lined up in order, and the scene was very shocking. Seeing this, the kingdom's ministers were bewildered. Ouyang Shuo smiled slightly. Shanghai City was able to defeat the Spanish fleet this time because of Her Majesty's gift. According to our Oriental tradition, courtesy demands reciprocity. This is a small token of my appreciation. Please accept it, Your Majesty. As soon as he finished speaking, it immediately caused a commotion. The way the kingdom's ministers looked at Ouyang Shuo was different, from the initial vigilance to gratitude. 10,000 years ago, the Atlanteans had created a great civilization. They were not fools. The kingdom's ministers, including Kalia, had already realized the hidden dangers that Ouyang Shuo was worried about. It was not easy for the Atlanteans to gain a foothold in the Mediterranean Sea. It was precisely because of this that they would constantly restore the various facilities on the island day and night, in order to obtain the power to protect themselves. However, all of this needed time. The 1,000 cannons that Ouyang Shuo had gifted them were undoubtedly timely help. They immediately armed the Atlantis island to the teeth, and the thieves would not dare to have any evil thoughts. In this way, Atlantis had a rare moment of respite. Previously, Kalia's excessive intimacy with Ouyang Shuo had worried the kingdom's ministers. They were worried that their queen would be bewitched by the mutant in front of them. Now, it seemed that they had worried too much. Although the young man in front of them was young, he was extremely magnanimous and did not have the slightest intention of taking advantage of the Atlanteans. The cooperation between the two was indeed a good choice. Since it's a gift from Lord Wui, we will accept it. Kalia smiled, and the smile in his eyes deepened. He briskly led the way in front of them. Lord Wui, please come in. The majestic team walked toward the palace in the inner circle. In the past few days, players had found the Atlantis island one after another and began to do missions on the island. Especially on the island in the middle circle, players could be seen everywhere. Such a grand scene naturally alarmed these players who were doing missions. Seeing that the Marquis of Lianzhou and his party had received such a high standard of reception from Atlantis, the players from various countries were jealous. At the same time, their fear and attention towards Shanghai City deepened. It seems that the Marquis of Lianzhou and the Queen of Atlantis have a very close relationship. The spies of various countries among the players secretly noted this detail down. As for the 1,000 Spanish cannons, they dazzled the eyes of the players. At this moment, they could only worship the Marquis of Lianzhou's extravagance. Those who were slightly knowledgeable would know that the Spanish cannons were the most advanced cannons in the Mediterranean Sea, and each cannon cost 500 gold coins. Even so, it was still priceless. The most conservative estimate of the 1,000 Spanish cannons would be worth no less than 500,000 gold coins. For ordinary players, this was an astronomical figure that they couldn't earn even after playing the game for 10 years. The Marquis of Lianzhou's extravagance was beyond their comprehension. Ouyang Shuo, who was walking on the red carpet, noticed the players on both sides pointing at him from the corner of his eyes, and he smiled in satisfaction. His high-profile visit this time was to attract the attention of the various countries in the Mediterranean Sea. Ouyang Shuo wanted to clearly send a message to the various countries that the relationship between Shanghai City and the Atlantis island was very close, and he wanted to advise them not to have any unnecessary thoughts. The current Ouyang Shuo had long passed the stage of using force to deter his opponents. Sometimes, the effect of appropriate diplomatic means was even stronger than force. In the palace's reception room, on the island, in the inner circle, Brother Wui, Kalia is very happy that you came to see me. Without outsiders around, Kalia immediately dropped the queen's disguise and became intimate with Ouyang Shua. Ouyang Shua was calm. He said with a smile, "Other than coming to see you, I have something to ask of you. Speak." Kalia appeared to be more eager than Ouyang Shua. "As long as Kalia can do it, I'll do my best." The person accompanying Kalia to meet the guest was the chief minister of the Atlantis kingdom, Alis. He was an old man with white hair. Alis had a special identity, and he was appointed by Kalia's father as the assistant minister. Hearing the queen's promise, Alis frowned. After thinking for a moment, he didn't stop her. Although Her Majesty was young, she was actually very smart and experienced. At this time, it was better not to disrespect the queen. Ouyang Shua glanced at Alis inadvertently, and a trace of admiration flashed in his eyes. "I hope that Shanghai City can form a strategic alliance with Atlantis and advance and retreat together in the Mediterranean Sea." Ahem! Alis coughed and cleverly interrupted Kalia's words. At this time, he had to be the bad guy. He asked, "Pardon me for asking, but what is the specific covenant, and what are the obligations of both parties?" Kalia saw this and refrained from speaking. She also knew that the alliance was a major matter, a national matter. It must not be mixed with personal feelings. Otherwise, it would be irresponsible to the people. Ouyang Shua didn't mind. He also liked this kind of open and honest discussion. "I've drawn up a few basic principles for everyone to discuss. I'll try to finalize it today. As for the specific details, I'll leave it to the officials of both parties to negotiate. What do you think? That's for the best." Kalia smiled. She didn't like to argue with Ouyang Shua for the interests of their respective city-states until their faces turned red. It was better to leave these red-necked matters to the people below. Chapter 670. After a whole morning of closed-door discussions, Shanghai City and Atlantis officially formed a strategic alliance and signed a treaty. The core clauses of the treaty were the four main clauses proposed by Ouyang Shua. First, peaceful coexistence. The signing of the treaty was not to provoke disputes in the Mediterranean Sea. On the contrary, it was to better maintain peace and order in the Mediterranean Sea. Therefore, both parties were willing to cooperate with any third party with goodwill to maintain peace in the Mediterranean Sea and actively expand free ocean trade. Second, offensive and defensive alliance. If either party were to suffer a military attack, the other party would provide military assistance or weapons and materials if conditions permitted. Note, this clause was limited to the base city and the Mediterranean fleet stationed there. Third, trade. Both parties would open their ports to each other, allow merchant ships to pass freely, encourage civilian trade, promote technical cooperation, and jointly maintain the smooth operation of the Grand Line. Fourth, port permission. Atlantis allowed Shanghai City to build exclusive ports on its peripheral islands when conditions were right and could station troops when necessary. The above four clauses showed Ouyang Shua's ambition in the Mediterranean Sea. Obviously, Ouyang Shua's ultimate goal was not to form an alliance with Atlantis, but to develop allies in the Mediterranean Sea and actively expand his circle of friends. That was because the four core clauses of the treaty were basically applicable to other countries or territories. After the signing of the treaty, Ouyang Shua had no intention of keeping a low profile. He simply held a special press conference in front of the players of the Mediterranean Sea on Atlantis. Not only did he announce the news of the alliance, but he also announced the specific terms of the treaty to the public. He believed that in less than a day or two, the treaty would spread throughout the Mediterranean Sea through the mouths of the players. In the afternoon, Ouyang Shua returned to the base city. In return for the 1,000 Spanish cannons, Korea also sent a big gift to the base city, including 2 combat marionettes for engineering marionettes, 2 mimic aircrafts, and 10 Sea Shark mimic warships. Putting everything else aside, just the 2 giant combat marionettes were equivalent to 1,000 cannons. The combat marionettes were strategic weapons. In order to transport the two big guys to the base city, Atlantis City dispatched 200 mimic aircrafts to the base city by air transport. If it wasn't for the difficulty of transporting them, Ouyang Shua would have wanted to bring them back to Shanghai City. A 100-meter-tall steel giant. Even if it wasn't used, it would still look imposing in front of the city gates. As for the engineer marionette, it was something that Ouyang Shua urgently needed. Without a single NPC craftsman, the city's construction was impossible. Ouyang Shua was worried, but he didn't expect Kalia to solve it so easily. As expected of the Queen of Atlantis, her actions were heroic. Ouyang Shua thought to himself that he would have to compensate Atlantis if he had the chance in the future. August 5th, Base City. After nearly a week of work, all the original buildings in the city had been razed to the ground. Not only that, but a 12-meter-tall stone wall had been built on the side facing the sea. The Spanish cannons on the city wall exuded a dangerous aura. It had to be said that the Atlantean engineering magic marionettes were really impressive, especially when it came to building the city walls. They would go to the mountain to cut out the stones and then pile them up like building blocks every day. Not only were these big men muscular, but they were also excellent craftsmen. Ordinary masonry, and other tasks were not difficult for them at all. The Atlanteans had equipped them with all kinds of mechanical arms that could ensure that they could carry out all kinds of delicate tasks. Of course, when it came to the construction of the city, big men, like the engineering magic marionettes, were a little powerless. If they were not careful, they could probably collapse a house with just a step. Therefore, the inside of the city wall was still empty. Only the Castellan mansion in the center had been built. An airport had been built on the west side of the Castellan mansion to park the mimic aircrafts. The two aircrafts that Kalia had gifted them would become the air support of the base city. They were also the eyes of the base city. Apart from the base city, the port of Gibraltar outside the city had also been cleaned up, and the construction of port facilities had begun. In the future, the port would mainly be used for military purposes. Auxiliary facilities, such as ship repair shops, would also be built. 12 mimic warships were quietly parked in a corner of the port. Ouyang Shua didn't intend to equip the Atlantean mimic warships with a navy. Instead, he planned to develop them into an aquatic entertainment project. Tourists would be charged 1 gold coin for a ride on one of the mimic warships at the port. At the foot of the mountains on both sides of the estuary, 200-meter-tall combat magic marionettes were silently guarding the safety of the port of Gibraltar like metal giants from myths. It was foreseeable that the base city would be very safe in the future. It would have all 3 elements: sea, land, and air. In the waters outside the port, the Mediterranean fleet and the ocean fleet were conducting joint training. There was a natural difference between the Spanish Navy's tactics and the ancient Shanghai City Navy's tactics. The two admirals, Zheng He and Alvaro, have been staying together for the past few days to train their troops and learn from each other's strengths. For the Shanghai City Navy, this was a rare opportunity to improve. The base city was changing with each passing day. The Mediterranean Sea was not peaceful either. The arrival of the Shanghai City fleet had turned the place upside down. There was big news every day. The alliance between Shanghai City and Atlantis had completely disrupted the existing structure of the Mediterranean Sea. Anyone with a bit of strategic foresight would realize that the era when the Spanish invincible fleet ruled the Mediterranean Sea was gone forever. The new Mediterranean Sea was calling for a new ruler, who would emerge victorious in this competition. Every country believed that they had a chance. And on that day, the base city welcomed a special guest, the Lord of Vic City, Henry. As early as 4 days ago, Henry's liaison officer had arrived at the base city and conveyed Henry's greetings and goodwill. Ouyang Shua took the time to meet the liaison officer, hoping that both parties could conduct a negotiation of a higher standard. That was how Henry came to visit in person. Ouyang Shua was no stranger to Henry, the Lord of Vic City, be it in his previous life or his current one. Henry was a small man, and he was dry and taciturn, which, with his whiskers, made him even more unattractive. The entire European continent did not think highly of this Frenchman. Only Ouyang Shuan knew that in his previous life, Henry had successfully become one of the three magnates in Europe during the 5 years of Gaia. His position was extremely stable. Instead, Manstein, the top lord of the German region, who had always been favored, unexpectedly fell. At the same time, a lord from a Mediterranean country suddenly rose to prominence in the middle of the game. Together with Henry from the French region and William from the English region, they were known as the three magnates in Europe. From this, it could be seen that this short man was extremely shrewd. After learning that the invincible Spanish fleet had been destroyed, Henry was the first lord to take the initiative to seek cooperation from Shanghai City. Just this point alone was enough to show this person's foresight and courage. Bay City, the governor's residence. Ouyang Shuo and Henry sat opposite each other in the sparsely decorated guest room. "My room is shabby. Please excuse me. There's an old saying in your country. It's not the height of the mountain that makes it famous." Unexpectedly, Henry was an expert in China. He only said half of what he wanted to say. He was really a man of few words. Not simple. Ouyang Shuo was surprised. Henry, who was sitting opposite him, was not calm either. He had previously arranged for the liaison officer not to form any cooperation with Shanghai City. He had only wanted to form a good relationship with them. If France wanted to rise in the Mediterranean Sea, it could not avoid its old enemy, Spain. As the saying went, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." When the alliance between Shanghai City and Atlantis City was made public, Henry was truly moved. Without a doubt, the combination of the two had the strength to dominate the Mediterranean Sea. What they lacked was the participation of a local force. Vic City could perfectly fill in the last link. It was not only because Vic City was a local force in the Mediterranean Sea. Geographically, Vic City and Bay City were in the north and south, perfectly pincer Spain. After weighing the pros and cons, Henry finally decided to seize this rare opportunity to form an alliance with the two. In this way, he would inevitably be seen as a traitor and an alien by the Europeans. Such courage was not something an ordinary person could have. The outside world did not know how the two of them talked in secret. The next morning, another piece of news spread throughout the Mediterranean Sea. Shanghai City's base city, Atlantis City, and Vic City had formed a common strategic alliance, the Pan-Mediterranean Strategic Cooperation Partnership Alliance, or the Mediterranean Alliance. The core terms of the alliance were still the four major terms proposed by Ouyang Shuo. Vic City's set port was officially open to the merchant ships of Shanghai City and Atlantis City. Apart from the alliance, Ouyang Shuo also made a big deal with Henry. Bay City exchanged 300 Spanish cannons for 30,000 craftsmen and 50,000 coolies from Vic City. They would work in Bay City for a month to carry out the relevant construction of the city and port. At the same time, Ouyang Shuo spent another 200,000 gold coins to purchase a large number of supplies from Vic City. Obviously, Ouyang Shuo was copying the experience of building Friendship City. He used gold coins to exchange for time and strived to complete the construction of Bay City in the shortest time possible. The establishment of the Mediterranean Alliance had a profound impact on the Mediterranean Sea. The result of the strong cooperation was that the Mediterranean Alliance quickly filled the gap of the Spanish invincible fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. In this way, Greece and the other countries realized that they had no chance before they could really start working. The only difference was that compared to the Spanish invincible fleet, the Mediterranean Alliance was relatively peaceful, more open and tolerant, and welcomed other members to join. Nothing could be more unpredictable than this. Now that the situation was settled, it was time for Greece and the other countries to reflect. The Mediterranean Sea was about to usher in a new order. Chapter 671. Shanghai City's series of actions made the Spaniards feel complicated. First, they formed an alliance with Atlantis, then they roped in Vic City and formed the Mediterranean Alliance. In the blink of an eye, they had replaced their position as the overlord of the Mediterranean. The problem was they were still in a war, okay? The Spaniards were extremely conflicted, the coastal lords were on standby, and all the players in the country were ready for war. They were in high spirits, ready to avenge their humiliation, only to find that the enemy didn't seem to have time to care about them. This made the Spaniards very depressed, as if they had been punched in the air. Bastard, will it kill you to be more focused? Will it kill you? The Spaniards couldn't help but complain. When the Mediterranean alliance came to an end, just when the Spaniards thought that Shanghai City would finally be free to fight with them, the envoys of Shanghai City came to Madrid, bringing peace greetings from Marquis Lianzhou. Ouyang Shuo said that he was willing to stop, and both sides shook hands. The Mediterranean alliance was also willing to live in peace with Spain and jointly maintain the order of the Mediterranean. On the same day, Henry and Curia made similar statements. Of course, if Spain was not willing, the Mediterranean alliance would not hesitate to fight. The words were soft but hard, a carrot and a stick, very much like Ouyang Shuo. This sudden turn of events caught the Spaniards off guard. There were immediately two opposing opinions in Spain. The pro-peace faction believed that Spain needed time to reorganize the invincible fleet and that it was a good opportunity to stop now. The pro-war faction believed that the direction of the war couldn't be completely dominated by Shanghai City. Why? Shanghai City can fight and make peace just like that? The Spaniards felt wronged. The problem was that no matter how wrong they were, the other party's strength was there. Shanghai City alone was a headache for the Spaniards. Coupled with the strong comeback of Atlantis and Vic City, Spain's old enemy. If a war really broke out, the situation would not be good. In the hubbub, there was another opinion that the Spaniards generally agreed with. The ultimate purpose of Shanghai City's existence in the Mediterranean is to carry out ocean trade. They have no ambition for the Spanish mainland. But our neighbor, France, is different. That is the real wolf. The way I see it, Henry, that little guy, is probably hoping that we reject Shanghai City's offer of peace. They'll take this opportunity to start a war with us through Shanghai City and Atlantis City. This time, the Spaniard was completely awakened and broke out in a cold sweat. Even the pro-war faction was completely speechless at this time. They said in unison, "Yes, it is imperative to contain the rise of France in the Mediterranean Sea." Thus, the opinions in Spain gradually converged. It was against this background that Philip II received the delegation from Shanghai City in the royal palace. After some discussion, Philip II finally decided to confer an honorary title to Ouyang Shuo, and at the same time, give Gibraltar to Ouyang Shuo as a permanent fief. In this way, he managed to save the Spanish people's face. This kingdom war that had started and ended abruptly had ended just like that. Both sides shook hands and made peace. Of course, the grudges and cracks still existed. But in the face of the strong rise of France, the Spaniards must put more energy into the confrontation with France. Against Shanghai City's ocean-going fleet, they could only retreat for the time being. August 8th, Base City. Philip II's conferment allowed the Base City to have relay stations, just like the Friendship City. At the same time, the Territory Stone Tablet was created in the conference hall of the City Lord's Mansion. Ouyang Shuo once again used a Dark Iron Village creation token to activate the Territory Stone Tablet, thereby increasing the population of the Base City. The craftsmen and resources of Vic City had also been transported to the Base City. The Base City was on the right track. After the relay station was opened, Ouyang Shuo's first letter was written to Gu Xiuwen, the governor of the Friendship City. Half a month ago, Gu Xiuwen had already led a team to the Friendship City in Somalia and officially took office. The construction of the large shipyard at the Port of the Brave had also been completed. Ouyang Shuo ordered Gu Xiuwen to speed up the construction of a batch of warships and send them to the Base City for the use of the newly formed Mediterranean fleet. At the same time, he asked Friendship City to transfer a group of civil officials to the Base City for emergency purposes. The second letter was written by Ouyang Shuo to Du Ruhui, the director of the General Administration of Military Affairs in Shanghai City. He asked the General Administration of Military Affairs to prepare a batch of naval war supplies and to send a group of military officers to the Base City. Xiao He, the director of the General Administration of Administration, and Fan Li, the director of the General Administration of Finance, also received the order. The General Administration of Administration was in charge of the deployment of government officials, while the General Administration of Finance was in charge of guiding the private chambers of commerce to carry out ocean trade. With the establishment of the Bay City, the Grand Line planned by Ouyang Shua officially connected the Bay City, the Friendship City, the Lion City, the Cliff Mountain City, and the North Sea City into a line. Driven by the huge profits, not only the chambers of commerce in the territory, but also the large chambers of commerce in the capital would come after hearing the news. They would follow the route opened by the ocean fleet all the way. The Great Voyage era had really arrived. In this way, Shanghai City would be able to make a lot of money just by collecting taxes. More importantly, Shanghai City would greatly increase its right to speak on global affairs. Of course, the European caravans would also enter the Eastern Sea through the Grand Line. There is still a difference between the game and ancient times. Take China as an example. It was impossible for it to obtain a large trade surplus like it had in history. The difference in technology between the two sides could even be said that China might be at a disadvantage. This required the lords of the China region to put more effort into the technological research and development of their territories. Otherwise, if they fall behind others, they would be beaten. In short, the opening of the Grand Line by Shanghai City was like opening Pandora's box, making the confrontation between countries and lords full of more uncertainty and greater challenges. The opening of ocean trade would have a direct or indirect impact on the industrial layout of various countries, and even the rise and fall of their territories. Opportunities and challenges always coexist. At the same time, maintaining the operation of the Grand Line would also be a great test for Shanghai City and the Nanyang Navy. Driven by the huge benefits, there would definitely be people jumping out in the future to challenge the authority of Shanghai City. The road of Shanghai City's sea hegemony had just begun. August 10th, Bay City. The Bay City was on the right track, and it was time for the ocean fleet to set off again. Before leaving, Ouyang Shua held a huge sea auction in the Bay City. The items auctioned included 20 Spanish galleons, 30 Carrack galleons, 700 Spanish cannons, and 2,000 underwater breathing devices. As soon as the news came out, the entire Mediterranean Sea was shocked. The current Mediterranean countries were in a critical period of competing for naval combat power. Whether it was warships or cannons, they were urgently needed by the lords of various countries. The Spanish galleons and cannons were naturally the best of the best. As for the underwater breathing devices, they were even more eye-catching. Under the investigation of the spies of various countries, the culprit of the destruction of the Spanish Invincible Fleet, the underwater breathing device, officially came into the view of the players, causing the lords of various countries to be shocked. Before the incident, no one would have thought that the Invincible Fleet would fall into the hands of such a small thing. It was because the Atlantean civilization was too mysterious, and the underwater breathing device produced was too magical. Nowadays, the price of the underwater breathing device had long been raised to a sky-high price. How could the Mediterranean players not be excited when the Bay City auctioned 2,000 of them at once? The lords of the Mediterranean Sea who received the invitation for the auction moved immediately, fearing that they would be late. In the past few days, warships docked in the port of Gibraltar one after another. Because of the extermination of the Wan tribe, the port, which had become deserted, became lively again. At the same time, the powerful city defense of the Bay City was also displayed in front of the lords of various countries. The huge battle puppets, the valiant Mediterranean fleet, the towering city walls, the cold cannons, and the pseudo-aircraft hovering in the air made the lords of various countries feel daunted. Ouyang Shua had organized the auction for two reasons. One was to clear out the supplies in the inventory, and the other was to take the opportunity to build relationships with the lords of various countries. At the same time, he was also secretly showing off his muscles to remind them that the Bay City was not weak. He could not guarantee that the Mediterranean countries would not have any ill intentions after the fleet left. Therefore, Ouyang Shua could only try his best to create favorable conditions for the Mediterranean Sea Fleet and the base city before he left. Ouyang Shua also took the opportunity to share the hot potato of the underwater breathing device. It could be foreseen that if Shanghai City kept monopolizing this secret weapon like the underwater breathing device, the Mediterranean countries would not have true trust in Shanghai City. In the process, if someone tried to sow discord, such as the Spanish, who were eyeing them covetously, it would be very easy for the Mediterranean countries to develop collective hostility and rejection toward the base city. For the base city, the losses would outweigh the gains. It would be better to throw out a bait and let the other countries fight for it. Shanghai City would then take the opportunity to withdraw. At 10 a.m., the auction officially began. The lords of various countries were all participating in the auction, and they were all very wealthy. Naturally, Ouyang Shua would not be stingy and auction them one by one. Instead, he would auction them in batches. Moreover, for the lords of various countries, it was meaningless to bid for 1 or 2 warships. 10 Spanish galleons, 15 carrack galleons, 350 Spanish cannons, and 500 underwater breathing devices were auctioned off in one batch. There were only 3 batches in the entire auction. The last batch was the remaining 1,000 underwater breathing devices. The starting price for each batch was 400,000 gold coins, and each increment must be no less than 20,000 gold coins. At the same time, Ouyang Shua also stipulated that the players who won the first batch would not be allowed to participate in the subsequent auctions. This also meant that there would be 3 winners in this unique auction on the sea. Such an intense competition was beyond the Lord's expectations. Marquis Lianzhou's tricks are really profound. The Lords could not help but sigh. Chapter 672. The auction on the sea came to an end, and Ouyang Shua won another 2 million gold coins. What caught his attention was that the Mediterranean Sea Lord, who would emerge as a new force in the future, was one of the 3 victors. This person called himself Caesar and claimed to be a legitimate descendant of the ancient Roman Empire. In the 4th year of Gaia, Caesar rose to prominence in the European continent and became one of the 3 giants of the European continent. Only then was his legendary experience gradually revealed on the forum. Caesar was a lord player, but his gaming career began in the mysterious Roman palace. At the beginning of the game, Caesar was born in the Roman palace and was raised as a member of the royal family. Even the people close to Caesar knew nothing about the details of what had happened to him. In the first half of the 3rd year of Gaia, Caesar left the palace and officially began his career as a lord. Together with Caesar, 50,000 Roman imperial guards, 20,000 top craftsmen, thousands of senior officials, millions of gold coins worth of treasures, hundreds of special items, building blueprints, technical manuals, and so on. In short, anything that a lord needed, the Roman palace prepared for Caesar. Even the title of a lord was restricted, and he was given the title of a second-class marquis. According to the information revealed on the forum, even the village creation token used by Caesar was a gold-grade village creation token. Gavius Octavius Augustus, who lived in seclusion in the Roman palace, even gave his general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa to Caesar. Agrippa was the general who helped Octavian defeat Antony and won the Roman Civil War. Even in the history of ancient Rome, he was enough to be ranked among the top 10 generals. In the naval battle of Actium, Agrippa commanded the army and defeated the allied army of Antony and Cleopatra. After the battle, Antony committed suicide, and Egypt became a Roman province. It could be seen that Augustus really raised Caesar as a successor. Although Caesar was delayed in the palace for 2 years, the beginning of his career as a lord was enough to make all the lords around the world feel ashamed. Without a doubt, this was a typical lord who could overtake at the bend. Being born in the palace was Caesar's adventure mission. Such an opportunity was something that outsiders could not be envious of. It could be imagined that Caesar's source of fortune must be extremely high. As for Caesar's claim that he could be born in the palace because of the royal blood flowing in his body, not many people believed it. Ouyang Shua snorted disdainfully at this. Caesar's publicity was just to increase their prestige and legitimacy in Italy. In fact, Caesar wasn't the only one in the world who had such a fortuitous encounter. At the very least, Ouyang Shua knew that there was a young man in the royal palace of the China district who was silently accumulating power with the intention of soaring into the sky. The auction at sea ended, and the base city was officially recognized by the feudal lords of the Mediterranean Sea. Ouyang Shua's mission also came to an end. Early the next morning, the fleet left the Strait of Gibraltar and set off again. After passing through the Strait of Gibraltar, the fleet officially entered the Atlantic Ocean and headed north to the English Channel. If the fleet continued westward across the North Atlantic, it would reach New York in the United States. If time allowed, Ouyang Shua didn't mind going to America. The problem was that it was already August. According to Ouyang Shua's prediction, the sixth war in the country had basically reached the critical point. He had to finish his voyage before the battle began. Compared to the exploration of the American continent, the trip to England was the focus of this trip. In the Celtic Sea of the North Atlantic, the Celtic Sea was located at the intersection of the Strait of Gibraltar to Western Europe and the route from North America to Western Europe. It was a transportation hub in the eastern part of the North Atlantic Ocean. The seawater was deep and there were few obstacles, which was good for the navigation of various ships. Since it was a place to cross, it was inevitable that there would be pirates. The most famous pirate group in the sea was the famous Viking pirates in history. From the 8th to the 11th centuries, the Viking pirates had been attacking the coasts of Europe and the islands of England. Their footprints covered the vast territory from the European continent to the Arctic. 500 years before Columbus discovered the New World, the Vikings had reached Newfoundland and explored parts of North America. During that era, the Vikings were synonymous with plundering and killing. It could even be said that the word pirate was derived from the Vikings. They could be said to be the ancestors of the Western pirates. At that time, they were outstanding craftsmen, sailors, explorers, and merchants. More importantly, the Vikings were valiant warriors. They were equipped with spears, axes, and round shields. They believed in the thunder god Thor. The Vikings' homeland was Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. At one time, they had controlled most of the Baltic Sea, the interior of Russia, Normandy, England, Sicily, southern Italy, and Palestine. What was equally famous as the Vikings were their dragon ships. The Viking warships were mainly made from tall and straight oak trees. As such, they were relatively light. The ship's body was narrow, but it was nimble and light. It was also very resistant to wind and waves. The bow of the ship was curved, and it was carved with a single piece of oak. The image of the ship's bow was that of a western dragon. This was how the dragon ship got its name. According to legend, not only did the Vikings believe in the thunder god Thor, they were also adept at taming dragons. They were natural experts at taming dragons. They could tame all kinds of dragons. In real life, movies and television had a vivid interpretation of this. In the game, Gaia combined historical information and movies and television to strengthen the existence of the Vikings. It evolved them into the strongest group of pirates in the North Atlantic Ocean. The dragon ships that the Vikings rode on were not only taller and mightier than those in history. What gave people a headache was that the Vikings in the game could really tame dragons. They were flying spiritual beasts that were generally at the gold rank and above. The powerful Vikings became the biggest obstacle for England, Holland, and other Western European countries to expand outwards. Currently, in the Celtic Sea, there was an intense battle between the Vikings and the English Navy. On the vast sea, the English Navy's 15 warships were lined up in a row, firing their cannons at the Viking dragon ships on both sides. The flagship in the middle of the naval fleet had 3 decks of cannons. At a rough glance, there were no less than 100 cannons on both sides. It was basically a fortress on the sea. The 3 English words, Annie, were carved on the flagship's bow. It was especially eye-catching. If one was familiar with the history of the English Navy, they would know that the warship in front of them was the iconic sail battleship. It was the best of the wooden warships. It was even more powerful than the gigantic fortress ships of the Ming Dynasty. The sail battleship appeared in the 17th century, which happened to be the end of the Ming dynasty. The ship was equipped with sails and was powered by wind. It had a displacement of about 1,000 tons. It was equipped with smoothbore cannons that could fire solid bullets. After the Anglo-Dutch War, the sail battleship's tonnage gradually increased. The top battleship's displacement increased to 3,000 to 5,000 tons. The number of cannons increased from a few dozen to 100. On the stage of naval warfare, the sail battleship was once the main warship of the Navy. Unfortunately, due to the limited range and firepower of the cannons of such warships at that time, and the fact that they could only use straight-line navigation tactics in naval warfare, the warships were arranged in a single column and sailed in a straight line. When the enemy ships entered the range of the cannons, they would start firing. That was why these warships that used straight-line navigation tactics were called battleships. In addition, the battleships had a common shortcoming. In stormy weather, the cannons of the third deck of the battleship could not be opened. The sail battleship's movement was completely dependent on the wind, and its maneuverability was limited. When the real strength of the two warring parties was not much different, it was very difficult to concentrate the forces in any form. Naval warfare became a lengthy exchange of fire between two parallel fleets. Often, decisive results could not be achieved. The fleet before them was in such a predicament. Hundreds of Viking dragon ships braved the cannons and dodged nimbly while besieging the Navy from all directions. In the process, the number of dragon ships that were actually sunk was negligible. At the same time, spears were thrown at the battleship by the Viking pirates. On the dragon ships, tens of thousands of Viking pirates let out battle cries, their expressions fanatical. The Viking pirates were ambitious to plunder, but they did not have enough people. Therefore, they had to rely on careful planning and surprise attacks. Their attacks were often divided into two parts. First, throwing spears from a long distance, then using swords and battle axes to close the distance. In the game, the Viking pirates were assisted by dragon pets, which were extremely abnormal. This time, the British Navy was ambushed by the Viking pirates. Under the siege of the dragon pets, they lost 5 to 6 third-level battleships and were caught unprepared. In the sky above the battlefield, two fierce-looking fire dragons with huge wings were constantly circling. From time to time, they would spit flames at the British battleships, igniting a raging fire. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that the British Navy was currently at a disadvantage. At this time, on the Annie, a conversation was going on. "Miss, we can't delay any longer. Let's retreat." The one speaking was a red-haired woman holding a large sword and dressed in a Royal Guard uniform. She had a curvaceous figure, and her huge twin peaks were still tall and round under the metallic armor. The Royal Guard skirt armor could not cover the woman's slender thighs at all. Due to long-term exercise, her thighs looked abnormally healthy and tanned, making them even more alluring. "No, Carolyn, we can't retreat." Opposite the red-haired woman stood a woman holding a silver longsword and wearing silver armor. The woman was young, only 23 or 24 years old, but her face was extremely exquisite. Coupled with her long golden hair, she looked just like the legendary angel warriors. "Miss," Carolyn looked anxious. The young lady opposite her was known for her stubbornness and was someone who refused to admit defeat. However, given the current situation, if she continued to be so stubborn, she was afraid that the entire fleet would be wiped out. Once the Viking pirate ships reached the naval battleships, they would have to engage in the boarding battle that the Viking pirates were best at. When that happened, it would be impossible to retreat even if they wanted to. Chapter 673. Annie shook her head and rejected Carolyn's suggestion. She looked up at the sky. "Those two fire dragons are a big problem. Tell the gunners to give up on attacking the Vikings and focus on the flying dragons." "Understood." Carolyn's expression was stiff as she turned and left. Hundreds and thousands of gunners changed their target, and the fire dragons circling in the sky didn't dare to act rashly. In the end, Fire dragons were just slightly more powerful monsters. If they were hit, they would lose a layer of skin even if they didn't die. If they were hit in the vital parts or in the wings, they risked falling into the sea. In the game, the Vikings didn't train dragons like in movies and TV shows, where everyone had a dragon as a pet. Every dragon was the lifeblood of the Vikings and was equivalent to a strategic nuclear weapon. Under the control of the dragon tamers, the two fire dragons circled in the sky, but didn't dare to dive down. The flames they spewed gave the naval fleet a chance to breathe. "Put out the fire quickly," Annie said with determination. Although the sailing battleship was the most advanced warship at that time, it was still made of wood. Once the fire spread, they would be buried in the sea of fire before the Vikings even took action. "Quick, pour water. Hurry up." With the help of the sailors, the fire was gradually put out. As the giant of the sea, the battleship wouldn't easily sink even if it was bombarded by cannonballs, let alone a small fire. Its huge size made it exceptionally tenacious. Those who followed Annie out to sea this time, whether it was the Navy officers or sailors, were all experienced people. After a series of remedial measures, the naval fleet finally stabilized their position. However, without the suppression of the guns, the Vikings' dragon boats became more and more unbridled. They were even more fearless and faster as they charged at the battleships. Each battleship was surrounded by 5 or 6 dragon boats. The Navy officers on the battleships could already see the long, curly beards of the Vikings on the dragon boats. The pirates opened their mouths wide, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth with meat foam hanging from the gaps of their teeth. On one side was the huge dragon spewing fire in the sky, and on the other side were the aggressive pirates. The Navy's gunners suddenly found themselves in a dilemma. The sea was in chaos. The vertical formation of the naval fleet was completely broken up by the dragon boats. The 15 battleships were now fighting separately. Because of the chaos, they didn't even dare to open fire for fear of hitting their allies. A boarding battle was unavoidable. Pa pa pa. Gangplanks were put down from the dragon boats and connected to the battleship. According to the ancient Viking tradition, they should have taken turns to fight one-on-one. Everyone who stepped onto the gangplank would face the same fate. Either they would kill all of their opponents, or they would die in battle, and their companions would avenge them. If they felt afraid, they could turn around and jump into the sea. No one would chase after deserters, but those who gave up the right to fight were no different from the dead. From then on, even their families would ignore their existence. Therefore, the first to enter the fray at the bow of the ship were usually the most elite warriors of the Viking pirates. They would roar boorishly and indulge themselves in the thrill of battle. They knew that the springboard beneath their feet was soaked in the blood of their ancestors, and that their descendants would also land on the same place. During the battle, the Viking pirates were unusually fanatical and fearless. Anger made the Vikings appear powerful and terrifying, and such warriors were called berserkers. Unfortunately, they were not facing pirates, but the British Navy. The Navy paid particular attention to efficiency. If it was a one-on-one fight, a single gunner would be able to kill a ship full of Viking pirates. Ancient traditions passed with the passing of time. Fire at will. Countless bullets rained down on the Viking pirates. The pirates at the front fell in rows, their corpses falling into the sea. The pirates that followed behind did not show any signs of fear. They braved the hail of bullets, brandished their battle axes, and charged forward without fear of death. In an instant, the gangplank was dyed red with blood. To the Viking pirates, this was a form of glory. The Viking warriors on the dragon ship constantly threw their spears at the other side, providing cover for their attacking compatriots. The Viking spear-throwing technique was exquisite, and they never missed. The gunners had weak defenses. Once they were hit by the spears, there was almost no chance of survival. In the 3 years of Gaia, where firearms were still in its infancy, and with the support of the game's unique cultivation system, firearms might not necessarily have the upper hand against cold weapons. Be it Eastern True Essence or Western Chi, they were not to be underestimated. When one cultivated to a high level, ordinary firearms would not be able to hit a high-level warrior. For example, Ouyang Shua. After a huge sacrifice, the Viking pirates finally broke through the short gangplank that was less than 4 meters long. The Viking pirates at the front jumped off the deck and charged into the ranks of the gunners like ferocious tigers. The huge and sharp double-headed battle axes had astonishing lethality. For a moment, the flintlock team was in chaos. Once the gap was opened, it could no longer be blocked. Charge! Hundreds and thousands of Viking pirates stepped on the gangplank skillfully and jumped into the battleship. The chaotic battle officially began. This kind of battle style was what the Viking pirates were best at. The moment of glory that belonged to them had arrived. At the same time, without the suppression of the gunners, the two giant dragons circling high in the sky dived down again. Under the command of the dragon tamer, the giant dragons spewed out raging flames. The sails of the battleship were set ablaze, and all of them were scrapped. For a battleship that was purely driven by wind, without sails, it was like a giant without legs or a bird without wings. Even turning became difficult. Their huge bodies became extremely clumsy in an instant. The battle situation was becoming more and more disadvantageous for the naval fleet. At this moment, even if they wanted to retreat, they couldn't. Annie's expression was firm and resolute. With a swoosh, she unsheathed the long sword at her waist. "Iron Lady, follow me into battle and kill the enemy." A majestic aura rose into the sky, making her look heroic. Under the sunlight, Annie was like a battle angel from heaven who had descended to the earth, dazzling. The noisy and chaotic battlefield couldn't hide her brilliance, and the soldiers fell head over heels for her. "Huh!" In response to Annie was a chorus of tender shouts. On the upper deck of Annie, 3,000 Iron Lady guards were ready to go. They were all female players, and also the elites of the elites among combat players. They were well-equipped and well-trained. They were the Iron Ladies, the most unique unit in the English region. Although they were women, they weren't inferior to men. "Kill!" Annie waved her long sword, and silver light flashed as she fought with the Viking pirates. "Kill!" The Iron Lady army rushed into the battle, and they were even more ferocious than the Viking pirates. The Viking pirates, who had been aggressive just a moment ago, were gradually losing ground under the assault of the army. Surrounded by the Iron Lady, Annie was like a god, killing in all directions. In an instant, the morale of the Navy was greatly boosted. What a bunch of she-devils! On a dragon ship in the distance, the pirate leader Humphnut muttered to himself. "Boss, what should we do now?" A fat pirate beside him asked. "Hey, don't worry about Annie. Focus on attacking the other warships first, and then deal with those she-devils." Humphnut was small and skinny, and he was very different from the average Viking pirate leader. The large cow-horned helmet on his head formed a sharp contrast with his small and skinny body. His mouth of yellow teeth was even more glaring. "Understood." The fat pirate laughed, and he was as wretched as his boss. Unbeknownst to Annie, the Viking pirates were quietly adjusting their tactics. The flames of war were burning, and blood was boiling. Blood and glory were intertwined on the battlefield. "Miss, bad news. The other warships can't hold on any longer." Carolyn, who was covered in blood, suddenly ran over. The dried blood on her face made her look even more tender and beautiful, like a blood-colored rose blooming on the battlefield. Even the Viking pirates, who had unique aesthetics, were drooling over Carolyn's hot figure. "Huh!" Annie waved her long sword and cut off the head of a Viking pirate. She looked around. With Iron Lady overseeing the situation, Annie had temporarily stabilized and gained the upper hand. On the warships further away, the cheers of the Viking pirates grew louder and louder. Annie had only brought 5 battleships with her this time. 3 of them had sunk under the sudden attack of the giant dragons. The remaining 13 battleships were the territorial navy that William had arranged. Regular naval battles were the strong suit of the Navy, but it was too much for them to fight on the ships. Under the conscious pincer attack of the Viking pirates, the Navy soldiers were beaten back, and their corpses piled up on the deck. For the first time, a trace of guilt flashed in Annie's stubborn eyes. She was still too willful. She had rashly gone out to sea and ended up being ambushed by the Viking pirates. In fact, this was not the first time Annie had encountered the Viking pirates. The first 2 times she had met them were small groups of Viking pirates, and they were easily dealt with by Iron Lady's army. This aroused Annie's passion to eliminate the pirates. Little did she expect that she would be targeted by a large group of Viking pirates. The 3rd time Annie led her troops out to sea, she fell into the Viking pirates' trap and was surrounded by them. Not only that, but she also dragged the escort fleet arranged by her elder brother into a quagmire. "Miss, let's retreat while the other warships are still engaged in a chaotic battle." Carolyn looked anxious. "No." Annie shook her head stubbornly. "I will never be a deserter." "Miss." Carolyn had a helpless look on her face, and her voice unconsciously became heavier. "If this drags on and you're captured, wouldn't the sacrifices of the soldiers be in vain? That won't do. At most, we will die in battle." Annie stopped Carolyn from dissuading her. "Say no more." Warriors had their own path of martial arts that they insisted on. There was no such thing as compromise in Annie's path of martial arts. Just as she had said, "At most, we will die." On the Annie battleship, there was a sense of determination. The Iron Lady army was not dissatisfied with Annie's willfulness. Wasn't this persistence and uncompromising attitude one of the reasons why they followed Annie? Fight to the death. Fight to the death. Fight to the death. A murderous aura filled the air on Annie. At this moment, a huge swallow-shaped fleet slowly sailed over from the distant sea. The golden dragon flag fluttering on the fleet was extremely eye-catching. Chapter 674. Celtic Waters, Dragon Head. "Marquis, there's a naval battle ahead. I think they've encountered pirates." "Zheng," he reported. "Oh." Ouyang Shua took the binoculars and saw the naval battle in the distance. "British sailing warships." Ouyang Shua recognized the sailing warships immediately, and the battle became even more obvious. Giant dragons? Seeing the giant dragons hovering in the air, Ouyang Shua thought of the information from his previous life and concluded that these pirates were the infamous Vikings. "Pass down my order. Start the battle immediately and rescue the trapped British warships." Ouyang Shua put down the binoculars and gave the order decisively. No matter who the other party was, this favor would help Shanghai City gain a foothold in England. "Yes." Zheng, he was very straightforward. Unlike the British sailing warships, Shanghai City's fleet was made up of various types of warships. Their firepower was not limited to cannons either. They were equipped with catapults, ballistae, bows, and rockets. Against the Vikings, the fleet was more adept. Under Zheng He's command, the fleet formed a battle formation and charged toward the battlefield. At the same time, a group of frogmen quietly entered the water and snuck toward the Vikings' dragon ships. Although the frogman tactic was known in Europe, it was still unfamiliar to the Vikings. Before the fleet got close, the war drums were already beating. For a moment, cannons were fired, fireballs soared, and arrows rained down. The Vikings, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, were beaten into a sorry state and immediately panicked. "Get close," Zheng He ordered. The fleet was fearless in a naval battle. Chun Dameng and the other divine guards were already rubbing their palms, filled with murderous intent. "Kill!" The powerful divine guards and the sword and shield soldiers charged into the chaotic battlefield and started another round of killing. On the dragon ship far away, the pirate leader Humpback's eyes widened like a bull's. Half of his face was covered in yellow teeth. "Who can tell me who these damned people are?" No one could answer this question. Let the giant dragons kill them. Humpback was not ready to give up. "Yes." The fat pirate picked up the bullhorn hanging around his neck and blew a unique melody. The dragon tamer in the air received the message and immediately controlled the fire dragon to charge toward the fleet. On the dragon head, Ouyang Shua looked at the 2 giant dragons flying over, unmoved. He had even fought the mysterious eastern giant dragon before. Although the big fellow in front of him was a giant dragon, it was just a giant lizard that could fly. "Shoot down those two lizards," Ouyang Shuo ordered. "Don't worry." Zheng, he was also very confident. Flintlocks weren't the best weapons to deal with these flying creatures. The real weapons of mass destruction were the 3 bow 8 bull bed crossbows that the ships of the Ocean Fleet were equipped with. The triple bow 8 bull bed crossbow fired 1 spear 3 sword arrows, which were as large as javelins and had a shooting range of more than 1,500 meters. Even if it was a giant dragon, it would not be able to bear the consequences if it was shot by this arrow. On the warships, hundreds of ballistae were calibrated in an instant and silently aimed at the giant dragon flying over. On the back of the dragon, the Viking dragon tamer looked relaxed. They did not think that the other party had any weapons that could threaten the dragon. Imagining the scene of the enemy's battleships burning in flames, he couldn't help but reveal an excited smile. "Foolish human, prepare to receive the wrath of a giant dragon," the dragon tamer shouted. "Roar!" The giant dragon roared and inhaled. Its abdomen instantly expanded, and its huge belly was immediately illuminated in a fiery red color, as if boiling magma was boiling in the giant dragon's abdomen. "Fire!" Just as the giant dragon was about to spit out flames, the order to fire was given in advance. Whoosh! 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 One after another, giant javelin-like arrows were shot into the sky. Roar! The giant dragon in the sky let out a painful roar. The giant 1 spear 3 sword arrows had either been shot in its abdomen or in its wings, making it feel extreme pain. The giant dragon forcefully swallowed the flames that were about to spit out. Its face was red, and smoke was coming out of its nose. Roar! The giant dragon howled and staggered, throwing off the dragon tamer on its back. The dragon tamer helplessly shouted in the sky before falling into the sea with a plop. Their dragon didn't last long either. It staggered for less than a dozen meters before falling into the sea, raising huge waves. The pirate leader Humphnate was dumbfounded. He pinched the fat pirate next to him in disbelief. The fat pirate screamed like a pig being butchered. "It's true," Humphnate murmured to himself. "Boss, what do we do now?" The fat pirate looked at Humphnate resentfully. "Pa!" The Humvee kicked the fat pirate. "Are you stupid? Run." "Yes, yes, yes." The fat pirate shuddered and ordered the flagship to retreat. As for the lives of the pirates who were still fighting, they couldn't care less. Pirates weren't warriors. They didn't have any morals or lower limits. They had done many things like abandoning their compatriots. Unfortunately, it was too late. Taking advantage of the gap in the battle, the frogman team had already sneaked under the dragon boat. The flagship of the pirate leader was the target of the frogman's attention. Just as the flagship was about to escape, it began to sink slowly. "What's going on?" The boorish kicked the fat pirate again. This time, it was a heavy kick. The fat pirate felt wronged and was about to cry. It was his bad luck to follow such a hot-tempered boss. Fortunately, the fat pirate was thick-skinned. If it were his assistant, he would have been crippled. Even so, the fat pirate didn't dare to resist at all. He knew that once the boss was angry, he would be quite manic. "I'll go take a look." The fat pirate ran away quickly. He was extremely agile. In less than 10 minutes, the fat pirate ran back panting. His face was pale, and his forehead was covered in sweat. He stuttered, "Boss, it's not good. The cabin has been chiseled. There's a big hole in it. It's about to sink." "Oh, sh*T. The boorish cursed and pointed his middle finger at the sky. Without saying anything, he put down a small dragon boat agilely and jumped onto it. When the fat pirate saw this, his body instantly erupted with a powerful force, and he jumped down. "Boss, wait for me." Bam! The fat pirate fell into the dragon boat. The boat immediately sank and capsized. Asshole! Humphnate was so angry that he kicked the fat pirate again. The fat man, who had just been saved, did not seem to mind at all. He revealed a simple and honest smile, as if he had just survived a calamity. sh*T. The The boorish held his forehead with his hand, speechless at his subordinate. The two pirate leaders took advantage of the chaos to escape from the battlefield and disappeared into the distant sea. "Boss, what should we do next?" The fat pirate's honest voice came from afar. "Let's go find Boss Hitcarp." "Ah, go find Boss Hitcarp? That's great." "Asshole, stop jumping. If you jump again, the boat will capsize." Another exasperated voice came. The two best partners had disappeared into the vast sea. No one knew what kind of storm would happen in the future. On the Annie, the Iron Ladies were also dumbfounded. "What the hell?" someone complained. The Viking pirates, who were still unable to retaliate just a moment ago, were like weak chickens under the attack of an unfamiliar fleet. They were cleaned up quickly and cleanly. The ferocious dragon was killed in the first wave of attack. How did the ultimate boss in their eyes become a novice in the blink of an eye? Did I enter the wrong dungeon? Someone began to doubt life. We might have fought against a fake boss. "Miss, that seems to be the ocean fleet of Shanghai City." Compared to her friends, Carolyn was much calmer. Who said that big breasts were brainless? Not long ago, they formed the Mediterranean Alliance with Vic City and Atlantis City. It's about time. Annie had been paying attention to the news of the Mediterranean Alliance. The world's #1 fleet is indeed worthy of its reputation. Annie raised her eyebrows. She was a little dissatisfied, but she did not say it out loud. "Miss, should we go and thank them now?" Carolyn reminded her. "Wait a little longer." Annie was unmoved. Carolyn revealed an expression that said, "I knew it would be like this." The ocean fleet did not have the mood to care about the female soldiers. They detained the prisoners of war, collected the spoils of war, salvaged the dragon corpses, and so on. Everything was done in an orderly manner. It was as if this was their home field. After an hour, even a single gold coin that had fallen on the deck had been cleaned up. The corpses of the two dragons were hung on the dragon head and dismembered. It was said that the entire body of a dragon was a treasure. How could Ouyang Shual waste it? As for leaving some for the British fleet, sorry, those were the spoils of war of Shanghai City. The army of Shanghai City was experienced in war, and they were also the best in plundering the battlefield. When the Iron Lady and the British Navy saw this, they looked at each other in dismay. The tall, mighty, and invincible image of the ocean fleet collapsed in an instant. "Idol destroyed," someone exclaimed. Any powerful person would have a little quirk, right? Carolyn's expression was stiff as she helped the fleet clear the floor. No matter what, they were their saviors, weren't they? What she got in response was the silent gazes of her friends. Insatiable greed. Annie didn't give him any face and coldly spat out 4 words. However, Carolyn was no longer able to smile. At this moment, a tall and mighty general walked over. "May I ask who is the commander of the fleet?" "I am the captain of the guards under Marquis Lianzhou. In the name of the Marquis, I would like to invite the commander to the Dragon Head for a chat." Chen Dameng spoke methodically. It was obvious that he had memorized the information. An uncouth fellow like him could not say such genteel things. Seeing this, Carolyn smiled and introduced, "This is Princess Annie, the commander of our fleet. Please." Chen Dameng was very straightforward. Chapter 675. In the war room on Dragonhead. Zheng, he was reporting the results of the battle. "Marquis, we captured more than 12,000 Viking pirates and seized more than 20,000 gold coins, as well as some weapons and equipment." Ouyang Shuan nodded. "Send a battalion to send the captives to the base city and have them join the Mediterranean fleet. As for the gold coins, give them to the soldiers as a reward for the voyage." Zheng He smiled and cupped his fists. "On behalf of the soldiers, I thank you, Marquis, for the reward. The Viking captives were the best in terms of physical fitness and water combat skills. They were even better than the pirates in the Gulf of Aden and the Spanish Navy. Their only weakness was probably their lack of discipline. However, the Mediterranean fleet had Admiral Alvaro, so it shouldn't be a problem. The old general was someone who would turn hostile and was known for his ruthlessness in the army. No matter how arrogant the Viking pirates were, they would be obedient under Alvaro's training. The 12,000 Viking captives were enough to expand the third formation of the Mediterranean fleet to its full strength. It seemed that eliminating the Viking pirates was a good way to increase the number of soldiers. It was obviously unrealistic to expand the Mediterranean fleet by relying on the snail-like population of the base city. The refugees were mainly used to increase the population of the base city. It seemed that it was necessary to send a message to Alvaro and ask him to cross the Strait of Gibraltar and enter the Atlantic Ocean to eliminate the Viking pirates after the Mediterranean fleet was formed. In this way, training and expanding the army could be done at the same time. As for the weapons and equipment, send half of them to the base city with the captives. Give the remaining half to the British fleet. The other party has also contributed, so we can't be too unsightly, Ouyang Shua instructed. Understood. Zheng, he was a kind man. At this moment, the guard outside the door reported, Marquis, Princess Annie is here to visit. Let her in. Ouyang Shua stood up to welcome her. Ouyang Shua couldn't help but smile when he found out that the fleet they had saved was Annie's Iron Lady army. In his previous life, the cold-faced angel, Annie was known to players all over the world. Someone joked on the forum that Princess Annie had the beauty of an angel, but she had a heart as cold and decisive as a devil. If the course of history hadn't changed, Annie would have risen again after a setback. She would have become the nightmare of the Vikings. In the words of the Vikings, and was described as a demoness who killed without batting an eye. At the mention of Annie, their faces would turn pale and they would become the shame of the Vikings. In the 5th year of Gaia, the number of Viking pirates that Annie had exterminated was no less than 200,000. More than half of the Viking pirates had perished in her hands. From then on, Annie became famous all over the world. Countless great lords and great commanders had pursued Annie, but none of them had succeeded. Slowly, there were rumors that Annie was actually a lesbian, and that her subordinate, Carolyn, was her lover. It was precisely because of this that Annie rejected the pursuit of a group of big shots. In his previous life, everyone only saw it as gossip and did not take it seriously. When Annie walked into the war room, the entire room lit up. She was indeed an exceptional beauty. Among all the beauties that Ouyang Shua knew, probably only Feng Qiuhuang could compete with her. Standing beside Annie was a red-haired beauty with a fiery figure. Needless to say, that was naturally Carolyn. Recalling the rumors from his previous life, Ouyang Shua subconsciously swept a glance at the two of them with an indescribable meaning. Speaking of which, this was the first time he had seen the two of them. In terms of appearance, the forums were indeed not exaggerating. Seeing them in person was even more shocking than seeing their photos on the forums. However, Annie's cold expression made men not dare to have any improper thoughts. It was as if even thinking about it in their hearts would be blasphemy against the goddess. However, Annie misunderstood Ouyang Shua's gaze. She thought that Ouyang Shua was like other men, a superficial person who lusted after beauty. A trace of disdain flashed in her eyes. Princess Annie, I've heard a lot about you. Please take a seat. With Ouyang Shua's sharp senses, he immediately noticed the disdain in Annie's eyes. However, he did not take it to heart and took the lead to sit on the main seat. With his current status and state of mind, there was no need for him to explain anything. Hearing that, Annie sat down coldly. Speak. What do you want in return? Cough. Even with Ouyang Shua's composure, he was caught unprepared by Annie. What kind of attitude is this? This was the first time he had seen someone act so righteously after being saved. Forget it. Ouyang Shua waved his hand to stop Zheng he from speaking. Smiling, he said, straightforward, since that's the case, I won't beat around the bush. As long as Princess Annie can introduce me to my brother, I'll drop this matter. How about it? That's simple. Annie subconsciously frowned. She had seen too many so-called gentlemen who liked to retreat in order to advance. They would take the opportunity to get close to her and gain her favorable impression. Ouyang Shua's actions deepened Annie's misunderstanding. That's simple. Ouyang Shua nodded his head. All right, I promise you. Annie suppressed the disgust in her heart. Although she was cold and arrogant, she was still able to distinguish between gratitude and grudges. I want to see what kind of tricks you, the so-called #1 lord in the world, are playing. Any thought in her heart. When the time comes, don't blame me for not giving you any face. Detestable lecher. The atmosphere in the reception room instantly turned cold. Having achieved his goal, Ouyang Shua no longer had the mood to chat with this ice beauty. At his level, how could he be tempted by beauty? Furthermore, this was an ice beauty. In comparison, Ouyang Shua felt that the voluptuous Carolyn was more pleasing to the eye. Carolyn, who stood behind Annie, had an awkward expression on her face when she heard her mistress's words. She smiled apologetically at Ouyang Shua. Annie sat quietly, waiting to see Ouyang Shua's performance. She had seen this kind of trick many times. It was nothing more than an excuse to invite her to a meal to get close to her. Next, he would give her gifts, display, or rather, flaunt his wealth and power. Just thinking about it made Annie feel disgusted. However, Ouyang Shua had already stood up to send them off. That's all. Princess Annie, please don't forget your promise. I still have matters to attend to, so I won't waste everyone's precious time. Annie was clearly startled when she heard this. Something's wrong. Annie couldn't help but roll her eyes in her heart. Then, she became alert and consoled herself. Is he trying to play hard to get? Just wait and see. Let's go. Annie stood up and coldly bade farewell. This is too outrageous. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have saved them. After Annie left, Zheng, he couldn't help but complain. It was obvious that Annie's actions were very different from the Eastern education that Zheng he had received. Forget it. Ignore her. Ouyang Shua waved his hand. Send some military doctors over to bandage up their wounded. Pack up and set sail for the English Channel as soon as possible. Understood. Get the Navy to look after the prisoners of war to set off now. Ouyang Shua continued. When they reached the base city, immediately turned back and rushed to England to rendezvous with the fleet. Yes, Zheng, he left to make the arrangements. However, Ouyang Shua stood up and walked toward the deck. He hadn't had the time to check the spoils of war from killing the 2 giant dragons. Marquis, on the deck, the dismemberment of the giant dragon corpses was nearing its end. When the craftsmen saw Ouyang Shua, they all bowed. The giant dragons on Earth were just spiritual beasts that couldn't fly. They weren't as magical as described in Western fantasy novels. As long as one found the right spot, the dragon's skin could easily lie down. Among the leather types, the dragon skin was considered a top-notch material. Among them, the leather on the giant dragon's buttocks and back was the best. This was because the fibers in these parts were relatively dense, had strong mechanical strength, and had good resistance to bending. Perfect giant dragon skin. Quality 28. Top-notch leather collected from Western giant dragons can be used to make top-notch defensive equipment. Ouyang Shua kept the leather on the giant dragon's back and buttocks. It wasn't that he wanted to make any defensive equipment, but that he wanted to prepare a gift for Qing. This top-notch leather would definitely be the girl's favorite. Apart from the leather, the most valuable part of the giant dragon was the giant dragon crystal in its head. Its function was equivalent to the inner core of an eastern desolate beast, and it could assist in cultivation. The 2 giant dragons were of the fire element, and the dragon crystal was also of the fire element. It didn't match Ouyang Shua's cultivation technique or even his talent. If he forcefully used it, the effect would probably be greatly reduced. However, this dragon crystal was a top-notch treasure for Western hidden professions, magicians. Ouyang Shua put the 2 dragon crystals into his storage bag and turned to leave. As for refining the body with dragon blood, it didn't exist in Earth's only. At most, the dragon meat contained more energy. The 2 giant dragons could be dismembered into several tons of dragon meat, enough for the ocean fleet to consume for a while. On the 15th of August, the ocean fleet set off once again, accompanied by the remnants of Annie's troops. The journey was peaceful, and they didn't encounter any Viking pirates. The Viking pirates were most active in the North Sea, Norway, and Greenland seas, not the Celtic Sea, but the North Sea. Those were their true lair. Annie had already encountered the largest group of Viking pirates in the Celtic Sea. On the 18th of August, the fleet successfully arrived at Plymouth Harbor in England. In reality, Plymouth was a city with a rich maritime history. It used to be a shipyard for the British Royal Navy, and it was also the main port for the British to go to sea in the 16th and 19th centuries. As early as 1000 BC, there was a small commercial port here. In the game, Plymouth Harbor was an exclusive harbor within the territory of Castle Avic. After receiving the news, the Lord of Castle Avic, Marquis William, was already waiting at the harbor to welcome Ouyang Shua and his party. Like Ouyang Shua, William was also a complete ciscon. However, Annie was about the same age as him, so she could cause more trouble, which gave William a headache. When he found out that Annie's fleet was attacked and almost completely wiped out, William was so angry that he almost used the territory's navy to encircle the Viking pirates. He only gave up after his subordinates tried to stop him. William was extremely grateful to Ouyang Shua and his party. Chapter 676. The moment Ouyang Shua arrived at Plymouth Harbor, a system announcement resounded all over the world. Global announcement. Congratulations to China's player not have closed for leading Shanghai City's ocean fleet and completing a voyage across 3 continents and 3 oceans. This is unprecedented and will be recorded in the history books. The player will be rewarded with 50,000 achievement points, 100,000 reputation points, and a special item. Congratulations to the player. As soon as the announcement came out, the players around the world could only exclaim in surprise. It had been more than 4 months since then, and the magnificent feat of Shanghai City's ocean-going fleet had long been known to the world. Along the way, they had set off waves and even terrifying waves in Southeast Asia, the Gulf of Aden, and the Mediterranean Sea. Not only Shanghai City, but the players all over the world were paying attention to this unprecedented ocean-going fleet. Some were envious, some were jealous, and some were simply amazed. A new page had been turned in the history of the game's ocean-going fleet. Ouyang Shua clearly remembered that in his previous life, it was the Spanish Invincible Fleet that had achieved such an achievement. History had quietly changed. The moment they arrived in England, Shanghai City had officially become a territory that had an important influence on the world. Be it in terms of reputation or speaking power, they had already surpassed the scope of the China region. Ouyang Shua stood at the bow of the ship with a complicated expression. At this moment, he thought of many things. The scenes that he had experienced along the way flashed through his mind. The stormy waves in the Spratly Islands, the mysterious and unpredictable Dragon Island, the life and death battle in Star Nation, the bloody night in Somalia, the underwater journey in Atlantis. These scenes seemed to have happened just yesterday. Along the way, Shanghai City had gained a lot, but also lost a lot. The officers and soldiers of the ocean-going fleet had been replaced several times. Thousands of officers and soldiers had been completely buried at the bottom of the sea for the sake of the territory's maritime hegemony. The ocean-going fleet had traversed mountains of corpses and seas of blood to achieve the great achievement that it had today. The opening of the Grand Line, the establishment of Star State County, Friendship City, and the Base City, and the establishment of the Mediterranean Sea Alliance were all major events that affected the countries along the way. While Shanghai City was stirring up the flames of war, it was also constantly gaining friendship. The tempering of blood and fire made the ocean-going fleet unstoppable. In the end, we still succeeded, didn't we? Ouyang Shua's expression was lonely, but his eyes were unusually firm. Ouyang Shua was far from reaching the end of the road to supremacy, and he did not allow his heart to have a trace of weakness or waver. Not far away, Zheng He looked at the back of the marquee with a complicated look in his eyes. He sighed inwardly. The road to becoming a king is lonely, Zheng He thought. At this moment, Zheng He suddenly felt that he understood the marquis. She understood the loneliness hidden under the unswerving determination. At the end of the day, the Marquis was only a young man in his 20s, but he was already shouldering the hopes and hopes of tens of millions of subjects, leading them through the wilderness. A white light flashed in Ouyang Shua's hand as an exquisite scroll appeared. It was the special item that Gaia had rewarded him with. When he opened it, he saw that it was the map of the global sea area, which detailed the geographical information of each ocean. This map was extremely crucial to Shanghai City's path of hegemony over the seas. With it, it would save the Navy a lot of surveying work, saving countless manpower and resources, and winning the most precious time. More importantly, with Gaia's reward of 50,000 merit points, Ouyang Shua's total merit points broke through the million mark in one fell swoop, allowing him to be promoted to Duke. As such, it triggered a second system announcement. Global announcement. Congratulations to the China region's player Not Have Clothes for becoming the world's first territorial lord to be promoted to Duke. He will be given the title Duke of Shanghai and rewarded with 50,000 reputation points. Specific rewards will be distributed in the capital. Such a brilliant achievement could only be described as amazing. If Ouyang Shua did not remember wrongly, the world's first duke in his previous life was born at the end of Gaia's 4th year. This also meant that in this life, Ouyang Shua had achieved this achievement more than a year in advance. Ouyang Shua's position as the world's #1 territorial lord became more and more solid. At this point, Shanghai City's path to becoming a nation had been clear to the final obstacle. All that was left was to promote Shanghai City to a capital as soon as possible. Currently, Shanghai City was only a second-level county city. When Ouyang Shua returned, he should be able to successfully promote Shanghai City to a third-level county city. As for promoting to a capital city, it would probably take some more tempering. Ignoring everything else, how to quickly fill the population limit of 1 million was a huge problem. Not to mention, Gaia would definitely set up a capital city promotion mission. The difficulty of promotion was definitely higher than crossing from a county city to a county city. This was because a capital city was a qualitative leap. The capital city of a player's territory should be comparable to a system's capital city. Of course, everything would have to wait until Ouyang Shua returned to Shanghai City. As for the title Duke of Shanghai, bestowed by Gaia, after the territory was officially established, the territorial lord could choose his own title. It was not limited to the title Duke of Shanghai. When establishing a nation, it was best for the title to be a single word. Otherwise, it would sound like a miscellaneous kingdom that did not have any grandeur. In more serious cases, a simple title could even affect the destiny of the nation. For the China region's title, the territorial lord could borrow the title of the Spring and Autumn Warring States period or choose a new one. Ouyang Shua had to consult Jiang Shang, Xiao He, and the other old officials on how to do it. This was because borrowing the title of a country might result in the country's conscription. When he was promoted to a duke, Gaia rewarded him with 50,000 reputation points. This allowed Ouyang Shua's total reputation points to break through the million mark and be promoted to renown across the world. As such, it could be said that he had accumulated enough. The sound of the system's notification sounded out by Ouyang Shua's ears. System notification. Congratulations to player Don't Say You Don't Have Clothes. Your reputation has exceeded 1 million points, and you have been promoted to renowned across the seas. You will be given the title Overlord as a reward. Congratulations, player. Overlord. Increases favorability with historical characters by 55. Increases success rate of subduing historical characters by 30. Increases success rate of subduing foreign historical characters by 20. Compared to the previous Mighty Lord, Overlord, its attributes were not only greatly improved, but it also increased the success rate of subduing foreign historical figures, which matched the description of renowned across the seas. It would be much easier for Ouyang Shua to persuade Alvaro to surrender now. His reputation had reached the 6th rank, renowned across the seas, and he had reached the upper limit of the game period. Further up, Gaia did not have any settings. It would require a system update before the relevant settings would be added. It was likely that Gaia never expected that there would be a crazy player like Ouyang Shua, who was able to break through the million mark in 3 years in Gaia. Even in his previous life's 5 years in Gaia, no one had achieved such an accomplishment. Ouyang Shua's action was unprecedented. He reckoned that there would be no one like him in the future. Thankfully, there was no system announcement for him to break through the upper limit of his reputation. If not, it would be too eye-catching for 3 consecutive global announcements to be triggered by Ouyang Shua. If he was too high-profile, people would bear a grudge against him. Taking this opportunity, Ouyang Shua checked his complete personal attributes. Name: How can I have no clothes? Territory: Southern Border Protectorate. Occupation: Omitted combat strength. Middle grade dark gold. Merit: 1010-000/2-000-000. Noble title: Duke. Mountain Sea Duke. Reputation: Renowned across the seas. 1030-000/10,000 titles. Overlord. Omitted. Barbarian King. Omitted. Quintessential essence. Omitted root bone. 45 perceptivity. 38 fortune source. 22 charm. 15 commander. 85 martial strength. 80 intelligence. 45 politics. 70 bloodline. Demon god bloodline. First awakening. Talent 1. God of war. Permanently increases combat strength by 20. Talent 2. Ice. Attacks come with an inherent frost attribute. Characteristics: Demon god possession. Increases combat strength by 200. Lasts for half an hour. Inflicts a weakened state. Characteristics: Emperor's Path. Increases heaven's perception. Gives rise to the might of an emperor. Mental cultivation method. Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. Chi Nurturing Chapter. Level 11/level 12. Techniques: Demonic Spear Technique. Mastery. Killing Sword Technique. Mastery. Qinggong. Ghostly Shadow Floating Wind. Mastery. Art of War. 6 Secret Strategies. Wu Tao Volume. Skills: Omitted Mount. Little Green Quasi-Divine Beast. Special Mount: Dolphin Mimicry Aircraft. Weapon: Demonic Spear. High-grade Divine Weapon. Scarlet Knight Sword. Divine Weapon. Equipment: Divine Set Dragon Battle Double Devouring Dragon Armor. Cloud Dragon 9 Stripes Battle Boots Cloak. Omitted Secret Treasure. Emperor's Seal Divine Tier. Purple Magnetic or exclusive to the royal family. Special items: Yin Yang Copper Coin. Group Resurrection Scroll. Black Dragon Skeleton. Fire Dragon Crystal, etc. Apart from his title and title, Ouyang Shua's other attributes had also undergone earth-shattering changes. Whether it was his basic attributes, equipment, techniques, etc., they had all undergone a sharp change. Even his weak attribute, fortune, had begun to be filled. Ouyang Shua had already given the Dragon Phoenix Imperial Pendant among the treasures to Song Jia before setting out to sea. The purple magnetic ore that he had obtained in Atlantis just happened to fill the gap in the Dragon Phoenix Imperial Pendant. After setting out to sea, after a period of adjustment, Little Green finally acknowledged Ouyang Shua as its owner and became Ouyang Shua's exclusive mount, completely replacing the position of the Cyan Beetle Horse King Qingdian. Ouyang Shua's personal mimicry aircraft had unexpectedly also been included in the ranks of mounts. It seemed that Gaia's definition of a mount was not limited to living creatures. After a long voyage, Ouyang Shua's storage bag had gained another batch of strange special items. Looking at all, Ouyang Shua's personal attributes could be said to be gorgeous. Plymouth Harbor Pier. A series of system announcements disrupted William's meticulously prepared welcome ceremony. Of course, William's smile was even more brilliant. Even the cold Annie could not help but glance at Ouyang Shua. At this point in time, this kind of achievement really could not be looked down upon. Marquis of Lianzhou, no. I should now call you Duke of Mountain and Sea. Welcome. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.